Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about the Papal Bull condemning communism. Now, there are two people I definitely need correction among Catholics today. One, people who are on the woke left who think that communism is in line with Catholic teaching. It is not. Period. Full stop. No. It is definitely an error that has been condemned by the church. It's both as an economic and an ideological system that we as Catholics must full-heartedly reject. Full stop. Anyone tells you that they're both Catholic and communist is flatly lying, and they are supporting a system that has persecuted both the church and numerous other people, and frankly has literally gotten more people killed than even the Nazis did. And that's saying something. On the other hand, I always tell people this. It is necessary to condemn communism in the same sense in which the church condemns it. And that not anything that's anti-communist will do. I'll give a comparison. So, for example, as Catholics, we are required to reject Islam. But not anything that is not Muslim will do. For example, Hindus in India are not very fond of Islam. That being said, it is not therefore permissible, because we as Catholics are forbidden to accept Islam, that we are to promote belief in multiple deities, pantheism, and sacrifice to false gods, which Hinduism believes in, which Hinduism teaches. There are aspects of Islam that we as Catholics are required to believe in. For example, the idea that there's only one true God. That being said, Islam is still a false religion, which we as Catholics are forbidden to support, endorse, etc., but not everything that is not Muslim works. In a similar way, there is an extreme regrettably among some right-wing Catholics that likes labeling just about anything that is not communist as being good, so long as it opposes communism, because communism is evil. Right in that communism is being evil, wrong in that all their alternatives, notably endorsing things like Nazism, which is completely insane. There's a lot of open-mindedness in the Catholic teaching on political systems, but atheism and communism are the two that have been explicitly condemned. Also in secularist capitalism, which has led to numerous abuses, which gets criticized even in this document, by the way. That's one of the reasons why I want to go over this document. To show that communism is condemned by the church, but also that a lot of the some of the alternatives that people are trying to promote in its place, like unrestrained capitalism, is not endorsed by the Catholic Church, is not lauded, and is lashed out at, even in this decree. So without further ado, let's look over what the popes have had to say about communism. And let's condemn communism from a Catholic point of view and not just label anything that is not communist as being also wonderful. Venerable brethren, health and apostolic benediction. The promise of a Redeemer brightens the first page of the history of mankind. The confident hope aroused by this promise softened the keen regret for a paradise which had been lost. It was this hope that accomplished the human race on its weary journey till the fullness of time expected the Savior came to begin a new universal civilization, the Christian civilization, far superior even to that which up to this time had been laboriously achieved by certain more privileged nations. So Christian civilization is the best. Not the Romans, not this civilization, not secular nationalism or American separation of church and state, Christian civilization. Nevertheless, the struggle between good and evil remained in the world, as sad a legacy of the original fall. Nor has the ancient tempter ever ceased to deceive mankind with false promises. It is on this account that one convulsion following upon another has marked the passage of the centuries, down to the revolution of our own days. This modern revolution, it may be said, has actually broken out or threatens everywhere, and it sees in amplitude and violence anything yet experienced in the preceding persecutions launched against the church. Tired peoples find themselves in danger of falling back into barbarism, worse than that which oppressed the greater part of the world at the coming of the Redeemer. That is not a resounding endorsement of communism from the Catholic Pope, saying it's persecuting the church and its ideology is worse than the paganism that preceded it. Not exactly an endorsement. Well, the popes need to get in line. They really don't know. Like, no, this is what the church has actually taught about communism. This is all too imminent danger, venerable brethren, as you have already surmised, is Bolshevistic and atheistic communism, which aims at upsetting the social order and undermining the very foundations of Christian civilization. Communism is the enemy. Communism is the enemy, and that is true. We cannot be communist. In the face of such a great threat, the Catholic Church could not and does not remain silent. This apostolic see, above all, has not refrained from raising its voice, for it knows that its proper and social mission is to defend truth, justice, and all those eternal values which communism ignores or attacks. Communism has a very materialistic point of view. I believe in the Soviet Union, they even would put people who believed in God, labeled them as having a mental disorder, and put them in mental institutions because they believed in God. The church in China, for example, is under severe persecution today. It is just about every country where communism has been tried. It's people like saying, "Oh, it kind of was never really tried, never truly." It's been tried, and its result has been complete barbaric insanity. It's gotten even more people killed than even the Nazis. The Nazis arguably could have, had they been left and not left alone, allowed to succeed, probably would have killed even more. But that's a standard that you're being compared to. You're not in a good playing field. It's not good. It is something that, or what do you want to replace it with? Well, maybe, and you could argue that secular democracy through the unborn kills even more people, and that's fair. Like, this is not intended as an endorsement upon the system that we have today. I would argue that in many ways it's just as bad or worse. But communism is not the solution, just as a lot of the secular Masonic ideologies we have today, or fascist ideologies, are not the solution either. The solution is Christian civilization in Jesus Christ. Ever since the days when groups of intellectuals, quote-unquote, were formed in an arrogant attempt to free civilization from the bonds of morality and religion. Oh, we don't need morality and religion. Like, who needs that freedom? Like, yeah, we got mass school shootings. And, like, as much as I myself, look, I'm Canadian. We have gun laws here. They work. They're great. That being said, like, for years in the United States, when there wasn't gun laws, there wasn't all this craziness. And it's probably playing a role. Just saying. In casting off morality and religion, probably has played a role in the downturn of modern civilization. And anyone who thinks it's not going downhill is kidding themselves. Our predecessors overtly and explicitly drew the attention of the world to the consequences of the de-Christianization of human society. Consequences which we are currently seeing with extreme wokeism, with oppression of the poor, and oppression of the poor, radical materialism, and it's something that we're just seeing across the board. We are seeing the consequences today on the right and the left. Period. With reference to communism, our venerable brethren, Pius the Ninth of holy memory, as early as 1846, pronounced a solemn condemnation, which confirmed, in the words of the syllabus, against the infamous doctrine of the so-called communism, which is absolutely contrary to the natural law itself, and if once adopted would utterly destroy the rights, property, and possessions of all men, and even society itself. Which, again, look at nations where communism was imposed, like under Mao in China. Even the communists thought a lot of what he did was just saying death. The Bolsheviks and the gulags under Stalin were insane. You have to compare it to literally Hitler to make it look good. And it is something that is not a valid solution to the woes we have in Western civilization. And those are real problems, but communism is not the solution. Later on, another of our predecessors, the immortal Leo the 13th, in his encyclical, quote, Apostolica Muneris, defined communism as the fatal plague which insinuates itself into the very marrow of human society only to bring about its ruin. With clear intuition, he pointed out that the atheistic movement existing among masses of the machine age had their origin in the school of philosophy for which centuries had sought to divorce science from the life and faith of the church. So here we're seeing what exactly is the problem with communism. Notably, it's more important than anything else, it's atheistic movement. Sad is something that a lot of secular capitalists, when they condemn communism, do not want to believe, because the expulsion of God from society and an official capacity is something that that could be applied equally to, say, conservative separation of church and state people in the Republican Party of the United States. Maybe not as violent and vicious, but the idea that God should be out of society is something that they hold as well, and praise and laud just as much as communists do. And so and that is like one of the first things that is called out as being the major problem with communism. It's militant atheism. It's militant desire to expel God from society. During our pontificate, we too have frequently and with urgent insistence denounced the current trend to atheism, which is alarmingly on the increase. Imagine what they say now. In 1924, with our relief mission returned from the Soviet Union, we condemned communism in a special allocution, which we addressed to the whole world. And our encyclicals, numerous listed here. I will not even try to pronounce the names. We raised a solemn, but there's a lot of them, raised a solemn protest against the persecutions unleashed in Russia, in Mexico, and now in Spain. Like, a lot of people talk about George Orwell. It's like, oh, how wonderful Orwell was fighting against the fascists in Spain. He fought for freedom. The Spanish communists were not wonderful freedom people. There's stories in Spain of priests being murdered by having a random crazy communist going up to them and ripping out their jugular with their teeth. Of going to churches, ransacking the place, digging up the graves of nuns, using chalices to have wild drinking parties and stuff like that. It was a persecution. It was insane. I think even Orwell himself, as I recall, watching a documentary on his life in school, fled, even though he fought for the communists in Spain, eventually fled the communists in Spain because they just ate each other. And they were coming after him, and he went back to England. Our two allocutions of last year, the first on the occasion of opening the International Catholic Press Exposition, second during our audience to Spanish refugees, along with our message of last Christmas, have evoked a worldwide echo which is not yet spent. In fact, the most persistent enemies of the Church, who from Moscow are directing the struggle against Christian civilization, themselves bear witness, by their unceasing attacks in the word and act, that even in this hour the papacy has continued faithfully to protect the sanctuary of Christian religion. that it has called to public attention the perils of communism more frequently and more effectively than any other public authority on earth. The antithesis, the true antithesis of communism, and indeed of secularist democracy with separation of church and state, and a radical secular capitalism, is the Catholic faith, because it condemns all their insane abuses. And I have read the Catholic faith, when you read what the Catholic Church teaches, it condemns all of it. This is why I tell Catholics you should not be lauding any secular figure. Yes, we need to vote. We need to play with the lesser two evils. That is unfortunately the world in which we live. But we can never lose sight of the fact that these things are all toxic. To our great satisfaction, venerable brethren, you have, by means of individual and even joint pastoral letters, actually transmitted and explained to the faithful these admonitions. Yet, our frequent and paternal warning, the peril only grows greater from day to day because of the pressure exerted by clever agitators. Therefore, we believe it to be our duty to raise our voice again in a still more solemn missive, in accordance with the tradition of this apostolic see, the teacher of truth, and in accord with the desire of the whole Catholic world, which makes the appearance of such a document but natural. We trust that the echo of our voice will reach every mind free from prejudice, and every heart sincerely desires for the good of mankind. Now, every heart sincerely desires for the good of mankind. Why isn't this talked about? Let's be honest. A lot of people just want to do either their race idolatry. They want their guy to win. And they're not thinking about the good of mankind anymore. It's one of the reasons why I'm going to do it. I plan on at some point making a video called The Catholic Case for Kamala Harris. Now, I'm not endorsing Kamala as such, but it is a desire to call out certainly some conservative Catholics to make them aware of the situation. There are a lot of people who I've heard about who put their party over their nation and their nation over God. That is, unfortunately, most people, even Tricaths, unfortunately, who fall into the trap of race idolatry. Or, I ask, say, Republicans, well, why, especially with Trump abandoning the unborn, okay, so I say, okay, why should we support Donald Trump from now on? The response is usually because then the Democrats will win. Well, why is that so bad? They're both pro-abortion. Well, because they're Democrats. Yeah, and they're teaching the same thing from a moral Catholic standpoint. Why are the Republicans still the lesser of two evil? Well, because they're the Democrats. And that's usually what it is. They usually get some list of some evils that Harris has done that Trump has already said he's going to do. And I'm not saying that you should that you should support Kamala Harris, but I am going to call out the fact that people are putting party and the desire to own the libs or exalt their race or exalt their radical nationalism above love of God and love of neighbor. And it's happening on all sides. And the reason I'm calling out conservatives who do this is because everyone knows that woke leftists just do this anyway. They just presume they're wonderful. I got endless stories. I remember I was in a sociology class one time, and there was this one woman in class. It was the way she dressed. It was brutally obvious how she was, and I pointed out to her. I said, we should have laws banning working on Sundays, because then that would ensure that by law more people have more time off, more people have more time to worship, focus on their values and life, and time with their families. Her response to get angry was, but that would encourage religion in society. My response was, well, yeah, it does, but people should be allowed to do that. It does match the religious heritage of the place where we live in the Western world. And isn't this about, aren't we looking at helping those in need? Isn't this what social justice legitimately should be all about? Helping those in need? The look on her face was just huh, this is strange. Like, yeah, she was a woke warrior for the sake of wokeness. She wasn't. They were not, quote. None of these people are sincerely desirous for the good of mankind. Pardon for the aside, but like, that's the reality why we don't hear much about the Catholic understanding why communism is condemned, because most people are interested in just their side winning. Sadly, we wish this to be more because our words are now receiving sorry confirmation from the spectacle of the bitter fruits of subversive ideas, which we foresaw and foretold, which are in fact multiplying fearfully the countries already stricken, or threatening every other country in the world. Hence, we wish to expose once more, in a brief synthesis, the principles of atheistic communism as they are manifested chiefly in Bolshevism. We wish also to indicate its method of action and contrast its false principles, the clear doctrines of the Church, in order to calculate anew with greater insistence the means by which the Christian civilization, the true civitas humana, can be saved from the satanic scourge, not merely saved, but better developed for the well-being of human society. Again, we as Catholics faithful tradition, Christian civilization is what we are to adhere to, not communism, not fascism. The communism of today, more emphatically than all similar movements in the past, conceals in itself a false messianic idea, a pseudo-ideal of justice, of equality and fraternity and labor, impregnates all its doctrine and activity with a deceptive mysticism which communicates a zealous and contagious enthusiasm to the multitudes entrapped by delusive promises. So, communism promised to elevate those in need. That is how it got in. And by the way, if I recall correctly from reading this decree earlier, a few years ago, he's going to blast, Pius XI is going to blast secular capitalists for letting capitalism get so abusive that it warranted this insanity. The people would be willing to try to turn to it. This is especially true in an age like ours, when the unusual misery has resulted from the unequal distribution of the goods of the world. So he is admitting that there is a problem. The pseudo deal is even boastfully advanced, as if we're responsible for certain economic progress. As a matter of fact, when such progress is at all real, the true causes are quite different. As for instance, the intensification of industrialism, countries which were formerly almost without it, the exploitation of immense natural resources, and the use of the most brutal methods to ensure the achievement of gigantic projects with a minimum of expense. So I'm thinking about the starvations that were caused by Stalin in Russia. The Holodomor would be one example of taking land away from peasant farmers and collectivizing it and resulting in massive famines. The doctrine of modern communism, which is often concealed under the most seductive trappings, is in substance based on the principles of dialectical and historical materialism previously advocated by Marx, of which the theoreticians of Bolshevism claim to possess the only genuine interpretation. According to this doctrine, there is in the world only one reality, matter, the blind forces of which evolve into plant, animal, and man. Even human society is nothing but a phenomenon and form of matter evolving in the same way. So this is very much like secular society today. So like, if you believe in the separation of church and state in America, well, guess what? You are paving the way for communism, because you are advancing its core. Probably the most core ideal of communism is radical materialism. By law of exorbitant necessity and through the perpetual conflict of the forces, matter moves forward the final synthesis of a classless society. In such a doctrine, as is evident, there is no room for the idea of God. There is no difference between matter and spirit, between body and soul and body. Again, it's secularism and materialism. That is the biggest concern of communism, and that is its foundational problem as for us Catholics. Now, the problem with this is that this is the foundation of our Western society as it is now. God is off to the side, but secular freedom and material well-being is very much what the Western world, especially in North America, we tend to adhere to. And you'll get on this Americans complaining about communism when they themselves, even in practice, even if they don't admit it, endorse this worldview. There is neither survival of the soul after death nor any hope of future life. Insisting on the dialectical aspect of the materialism, the communists claim that the conflict which carries the world forward towards its final synthesis can be accelerated by man. Again, this is secularism today, essentially. This entire paragraph could be described American society today, even if you're conservative. Even conservative ideals, like separate your church and state and American constitutionalism, would be condemned in this paragraph. Hence, they endeavor to sharpen their antagonisms, which rise between the various classes of society. Thus, the class struggle, which is consequent violent and hate destruction, takes on the aspects of a crusade for the progress of humanity. Again, think about Antifa. Think about the January 6th events. I'm sorry, I gotta call out the right in this regard, as well as the convoy people, because here's the thing: this whole paragraph is talking about materialistic ideals. Our salvation, our happiness is found in the material world, be that with equal and it can be achieved through crusade of violence. That is very much, think about even the American Revolution with its taxes. Think about Trump getting another 4 years after January 6th. That would apparently justify all that violent behavior, which did get people on both sides of that fight killed. It justified could be this is a notion that could be used to justify the events in Canada, in Ottawa, Canada, where because people didn't want to take a certain amount of medicine because of tyranny, a very much material thing. Let's be honest, and certainly for the majority of them, they didn't want the vax. Therefore, I want to do this. Therefore, I can progress society by being violent. And by the way, even in Ottawa, there were threats of violence. I was watching the Twitter feeds of the convoy daily, and they were talking about overthrowing the government, assassinating the prime minister, and the whole 9 yards. That's the thing. That is the problem. That, on the other hand, all forces, whatever, as long as resist such systemic violence, must be annihilated as hostile to the human race. I've seen so many people on right and left who you very much got the impression that if you were not with them, they'll just annihilate you as a problem. This whole paragraph is an indictment of our society today. The foundation, our society has the most basic foundation. Our Western society has its foundation, most basic foundation of communism. Right and left. We seek our ultimate glory here below. God is off to the side, if he's tolerated, and to a certain degree, if we can't get what we want peacefully, then we'll use violence to get it, and we're justified in doing that. People who want us to be pacifists should be pushed aside as just in the way. That is everyone on the right and left. That is both left and right. I've heard it on both sides. The only difference from atheistic communism is the degree to which they want to take it. Ten. Communism more restricts man of his liberty, robs human personality of all its dignity, removes all the moral restraints that check the eruptions of blind impulse. So there is notion of liberty. Liberty can be abused. Syllabus of errors is very much warns against extreme notions of liberty, but there is liberty as Catholics that we should believe in. So in communist societies, there is no private property, no room for private initiative at all. Period. Everything is in the collective, and I do mean everything. It robs you of your freedom to worship God, as we've seen in countries like, say, North Korea. Robs human capacity of all its dignity, removes all the moral restraints that check the eruptions of blind impulse. Again, this is becoming more and more left. This one is becoming more and more left and right. I've heard it said that the next election in the United States, they are just presuming it is not going to be peaceful no matter what. I don't know who's going to win. But they pretty well know there's going to be some sort of violence. By someone. Maybe we should stop. There is no recognition of any right of the individual and his relations to collectivity. Again, I'm a collectivist myself, ideologically, just because of my culture. That being said, I believe in a no men left behind collectivism. Individual people matter, even if I don't like them. And that's just the matter, and that's just how it is. Individuals do matter. In communism, individuals' rights can be cast aside. No, that is simply wrong. Individuals matter. There is no natural right. No natural right is accorded to human personality. Again, there is no such thing as individual human dignity, just the collective, which is a mere cogwheel in the communist system. Again, leftists do tend to eat each other. We've seen it quite often with. I remember even watching a YouTuber recently. She was leftist. I listened to people of all sides, and she had to tell people this leftist woman who said she wants to. You talk about moving out of the United States, because she wanted LGBTQ everything. Even she had to tell people that to not attack her for sticking out and fighting and being a cog in the system, because she was being harassed by some people and hated on, because she thought that the right position of her might be to leave the United States, to go to another place that's more woke, that you'd like more. That's a very personal decision. Maybe it's not right for everyone. She was being attacked by her own people in her own ideological system, not in an encouraging way. She was being attacked. That just goes to show you how insane it is. In man's relations with other individuals, besides communists, hold the principle of absolute equality, rejecting all hierarchy and divinely constituted authority, including the authority of parents. Communism, I know a lot of communists and leftists like taking apart all statues. Now, don't get me wrong, there might be something to some previous individuals of the past who may not be that great. There's always cancel culture in every society to some extent, but on the left it gets completely insane. I remember even having one friend who had gone full left. He said, I want to destroy all of the past. let's make this year zero. Everything in the past completely destroyed and forgotten about. I had a friend from high school. He was like that. And they're okay with finding the authority of parents. I remember hearing when Russia kind of pulled out of communism for a bit. It's getting quite authoritarian again now, but apparently a lot of Russian Orthodox priests said that one of the most common things they had to things there to confession was disrespect for parents. Again, in communist China, complete disrespect for previous authority figures and parents was a common thing in communist China when they overthrew the previous Confucian ideologies. The communists are authoritarian, but they reject authority, legitimate authority be it governmental, and they declare everyone's equal, everyone is comrade. But as we know from experience, because the world has moved on since this was written, the most authoritarian systems in the world are communists, often. What men call authority and subordination is derived from the community as its first and only font. Nor is the individual granted any property rights over material goods or the means of production. Again, like in communism, there is no such thing as private property. This has not worked out too well. In China, they've had to open up to some capitalism, but there are no property rights at all. Period. And everything is collectivized. For inasmuch as these are the source of further wealth, their possession would give one man power over another. Precisely on this score, all forms of private property must be eradicated, for they are the origin of all economic enslavement. The problem is that eventually, here's what happens in communism, and it's a fair criticism of capitalism as well. I always call secular capitalism on this score privatized communism, actually. The individual needs to have property rights. Why? Because they are, in Catholic understanding, property rights for everyone are actually a guarantee of rights when everyone has them. And that's why in Catholic teaching, and like in Rerum Novarum, it talks about private property as something that everyone should have. That is the idea. That is something that a society would want. Now, the problem with both communism and secular capitalism, as called it in Rerum Novarum, is you get a few individuals who own most of the wealth. And communism pretends it's going to solve this problem. Here's the thing, and this is actually satirized in Animal Farm by George Orwell. Someone's got to manage this collective property as a collective. And eventually you get some sort of demagogue or some person in a bureau. And the reality is they control the common purse. And eventually people are alienated from their property on a massive scale, even more massively than in a capitalistic society. Which is, again, it's a problem in can be a problem in capitalistic societies as well, especially in places where it is unregulated, especially in places where the Western world outsources abusive practices in the third world. That is definitely a problem that needs to be dealt with. Everyone needs to have private property. Everyone needs to have control directly over what they have, over their labor, over their, and they need to have the means to get property. And that is something that, as a society, we should want for everyone. Everyone should be able to have control over the means of production as far as possible, and be beholden to as few people as is possible. That is ultimate economic liberty is something that is an ideal and a good. Communism doesn't provide that; it prevents it when it's truly implemented. To some degree, like people use the term corporatism as opposed to capitalism sometimes to say how large companies can dominate fields and push out competition. which is why I sometimes call big corporatism to be a privatized communism in some cases. Fusing to human life any sacred and spiritual character. Again, I remember being early millennial years in university, people thinking how wonderful it is that we are getting rid of the notion of the sacred. Like, yeah, it just dehumanizes us. Refusing to human life any sacred or spiritual character, as we've seen in the gulags. And something that also we point out we see in, again, Nazism, with its camps and its racial ideologies. Like, I remember even having someone who was a supposed track-cath recently, DM'd me. They sent me an anti-Semitic memes. I politely told them, I don't want to hear this anymore. I'm not interested in these memes. Please do not send them again. Before blocking me, they went on a real rant at how I was supporting NIGGERS into the country, and I was like a race traitor and stuff like that, and I should open my brain that how going on how Jews hate us. Well, guess what? You want to know something that Jews and black people have? They have human life, which has a sacred and spiritual character. I'm obliged to love all human beings. Like, I may go on this channel about Protestantism and other religions that think are false sometimes, but make no mistake, I do that. It is coming from a place of love. It's because I want to see people in heaven. All human life has a sacred and spiritual character. Period. Full stop. No matter how horrible often they may be. Yes, even to these insane bigots, even these insane communists, which even when they deny it to themselves. Even figures like Hitler and Stalin had a human life that had as a sacred and spiritual character. And we should mourn over them because, if nothing more than profound lost potential for good. Profoundly. And that is something that we should grieve over. Such a doctrine logically makes a marriage and the family a purely artificial and civil institution. Yeah, you hear this all the time, that life is just this artificial social construct. We should have new families. I've seen how the family where I live has largely broken down in my area, and I've seen the problem. I've heard it said that most millennials actually, as an ideal, want fathers to go out and work and women to stay home and look after the kids. And we're now seeing younger generations not wanting to get married at all, and the population going down because they don't trust each other. That is the result of it. It's societal collapse, and two sides of the spectrum absolutely hating each other. That is what happens when you refuse to give human life, be they man or woman, left or right, white, black, Jewish, whatever, a sacred character. That is essentially a communist ideal. This is the problem. Even if it's not full communism, even if it's something else, it has a certain enough of the character of communism that it is causing problems. And it says that all the family life is just the outcome of a specific economic system, not something ordained by God. Family life is not good. It's just the economic system, and yeah, it reduces human beings and family life to just mere something that can raise you more efficiently. I think everyone who's had, I'll say this as someone who certainly has dealt with a lot of people who've been in family. I dealt with people who grew up in very abusive situations where they had to leave the family for their own physical safety. Even they will not deny that a healthy family unit is something that is natural, ordained by God, and good, and is something that we should be striven for and preserved. There exists no natural bond of a juridical moral nature that is not subject to the individual or the collectivity. Divorce in a marriage And marriage is wonderful in our society. Now we have freedom. Yay. This is literally not just describing communism. It is describing Western secular society, even among the right. So far. Like, even think Donald Trump. Again, he's been divorced or remarried how many times? Naturally, therefore, the notion of an indissoluble marriage tie is scouted. Divorce rates are how high in the West now? Again, like, liberal, post-Cold War, non-communists. How high? Even among right-wing people, communism, its divorce is how high? Communism is particularly characterized by the rejection of any link that binds women, the family, and the home. And emancipation is proclaimed as a basic principle. Like, again, radical feminism, family life bad. Like, I'm just of an opinion that family life is essential. Even if you're a man. I think, like, as a man, as a husband, like, I'm a firm, like, okay, my comment on this is, do I think women should be bound to the family and the home? To some certain degree, I think men should be bound by the family and the home. A guy should go out to work primarily to support his family. And I think a man's emancipation from his family to not have to support his wife and children is incredibly toxic, and does not lead to his happiness. Never mind a woman. Woman's the same thing. She is withdrawn from the family and the care of children to be thrust instead into public life and the collective production under the same conditions as a man. Women are essentially liberated from the tyranny of the home, so they can be more efficiently be exploited by government. I remember a story by the employers, essentially. That is essentially what communism does. And what we have today, like, I remember growing up with my mother, and I remember a story of another person. I remember a story of someone who once said that he grew up, his father was not the nicest guy. He would yell at his mother, who was a stay-at-home mother, looked after the kids quite well, raised them well, and would yell at her for hours to, quote, get a job. That was not very liberating for her. That was not liberating for her children. It was not progressive and realistic. It was toxic. The care of home and children then devolves upon the collectivity. Essentially, they don't want parents having control over their family and children and raising them with the family values. So women watching this, the reason why society wants you to work is not so much because to give you money and everything and freedom, but more or less they can take kids out of your control and raise them for you, so you do not have control over something else. And again, men, like, if you want to solve this problem, if you want to fight against this, fight for laws that let men get paid enough so they can support a wife and children, so the wife can stay at home. That is an option, and at least an option. Be a good husband. Be a provider. Finally, the right of education is denied to parents. Yes, homeschoolers have a right to homeschool, and honestly, I've seen public schools, like, honestly, I think even if you're an atheist, even if I were an atheist, even if I were a communist, I would probably homeschool these days. And make this an exception to collectivization. For the simple and because it's not safe in schools anymore. I remember going to school, and I remember being in high school and feeling physically unsafe, seeing property destroyed without any consequences to the students. For it is conceived as the exclusive prerogative of the community in whose name and by whose mandate alone parents exercise that right. So, parents have a right to the children as something that's delegated to them by the community. The children belong to the society and the country, not their families. I remember growing up in school and being taught this in elementary school, that your school is your family. Yeah, and when your school is your family, this is what I got first in experience as to why that's garbage. I remember being passed off. I remember they were experimenting on us and wanted to see what would happen if they didn't educate us. Thankfully, one of the teachers thought that was garbage too. Told my parents that I couldn't read, and I was eventually able to learn how to read. So it actually, I know from personal experience that having the community raise a child is incredibly toxic. And indeed, if I know, and if anyone who's leftist and woke is watching, I might get some very right wing Canadians mad at me for saying this, but residential schools in Canada, the education residential schools in Canada, the right of education is denied to parents. For it is conceived as exclusive prerogative of community whose mandate alone parents may exercise that right. You know, First Nation parents, hey, education is the right of the government. If you don't think the government can take them away, then you're a communist. Well, actually, thinking that the government can do that is communist. Literally. As defined by the Catholic Church. I'm probably going to get all the people mad at me for saying this, but that's what was happening, undeniably, according to every side. And that is what is called out as being communist in this document. What would be the condition of a human society based on such materialistic tenets? We pretty much just describe society, be it left or right. There's not a whole lot. Communism, it would just be like, most of this just ascribes to our entire society, left and right. It's just a few economic factors, which is probably why you only hear about the economic factors of communism and collectivization today by so-called conservative American anti-communists, because just about every other tenet of communism they already full-heartedly embrace in some fashion, without even realizing they're embracing communism. Even among conservatives, there's even some trad Catholics. It will be a collectivity with no other hierarchy than that of the economic system, which, by the way, is incredibly dehumanizing. Would have only one mission: the production of material things by means of collective labor, so that the goods of this world might be enjoyed in a paradise where each would give according to his powers and would receive according to his needs. Communism recognizes in the collectivity the right, or rather the unlimited discretion, to draft individuals for labor of the collectivity, no regard for their personal welfare. Well, I'm sick. The collectivity says you must do this. You're seeing some of this in Canada today, like with euthanasia. In Canada, I'm concerned, especially someone who has disabilities himself, who grew up with a learning disability. Communism recognizes in the collectivity the right, or rather unlimited discretion, to draft individuals for labor of the collectivity, no regard to the personal welfare. The government tells you what your job is going to be. So even violence could be legitimately exercised to drag in the reluctant against their wills. I'm thinking in Canada today about maybe not labor in Canada. Like in Canada, people like saying Canada is a communist society economically. It really isn't. We have universal public health. We have universal public health care. And most people would like to see it expanded in Canada, if anything. But people do largely have the right to say, I don't want to work at this job, I'm going to quit. And even the leftist parties fighting for the right to say, hey, I don't want to work at this, even against the government, is something that's even the left in Canada largely will fight for, which happily is anti-communist. What I am concerned about in Canada is becoming the right to die becoming the duty to die. Like I remember hearing a while ago about how you hear about it from time to time about people who are being pressured by the system into euthanasia, to choose euthanasia and choose the option of dying. I think there was a veteran who was being pushed to choose euthanasia, because it would save the government money. I think, and I remember a few years ago there was another individual who was being told again, why don't you choose euthanasia? Let me talk about the right year option to choose made, and that is becoming an increasing problem in Canada. In the communist commonwealth, morality and law would be nothing but a revelation of the existing economic order. Morality being subjective is not a progressive, amazing, wonderful thing. People think it's amazing that they can do what they want, and it sounds so freeing until you realize people are free to torment, abuse you, and that's totally right and okay. Purely earthly in origin, and unstable in character. In a word, the communists claim to inaugurate a new era, a new civilization, which result of blind evolutionary forces culminating in a humanity without God. People think that getting rid of morality is great until someone sins against them, is what I typically find. Yay, murder, not thinking murder is wrong is totally morally subjective. Sometimes it's necessary. You think that right until someone decides that you are morally unnecessary. Quote, when all men have finally acquired the collectivist mentality, in this utopia of a really class society, the political state which is now conceived by communists merely as the instrument by which the proletariat is oppressed by the capitalists, will have lost all reason for its existence and will wither away. That did... communism just collapsed and turned into a human HE-double-L hole. That is what happened in communist gulags. However, until the happy consummation is realized, the state and the powers of the state furnish communism the most effectuous and most extensive means for achievement of its goal. Yes, and it's going to be a long time before we achieve this perfect society, which is when we must purify everything all the time. And which is why some of the worst systems... And he ended up making a bad system even worse. That is essentially what happens in... That's manifestly what happened in communist societies. Like, that's essentially what Pol Pot tried to do. That's what happens when you dehumanize people who are enemies, or you think are wrong, etc. Such, venerable brethren, is the new gospel which Bolshevistic and atheistic communism offers the world, as the glad tidings of deliverance and salvation, and a system full of errors and sophisms. It is an opposition both to reason. Yes, the government. Yes, think about this one right here especially. Yes, just give us absolute authority, and then we'll return it to you, the people, because we will need no government. I just need total power to just eliminate everyone at will, for the sake of the common good, of course. That's literally what happened, like in under Mao's China, and it was insane. Such, venerable brethren, is the new gospel of Bolshevistic and atheist communism offers the world as the glad tidings, deliverance, and salvation. It is full of some errors and sophisms. It is in opposition both to reason, especially in hindsight, and to divine revelation. It subverts the social order because it means the destruction of its foundations. You cannot take pride in your heritage because it ignores the true origin and purpose of the state because it denies the rights, dignity, and liberty of human personality. Real communism is absolutely tyrannical, period. And there are such a thing as human rights. I went on in my syllabus errors about how North America, we worship rights to the extreme, to the point where we should probably pull back. But atheistic communism is like other extreme. It's like eating yourself to death versus going on a starvation diet and killing yourself by starvation. That's what these two extremes are. And ironically, they both have a similar foundation of there is no God, let's make heaven here below, and anything we do, any revolution to achieve that end is justified. How is it possible that such a system, long since rejected scientifically and now proved erroneous by experience, how is it, we ask, that such a system could spread so rapidly in all parts of the world? The explanation lies in the fact that too few have been able to grasp the nature of communism. The majority instead succumb to its deception, skillfully concealed by the most extravagant promises, by pretending to desire only the betterment of the condition of the working classes. You hear this all the time. Well, communism isn't that bad. Yes, it is. Every country that's been tried has been a disaster. By urging the removal and here's some of it's part of the solution. By urging the removal of the very real abuses chargeable to the liberalistic economic order, and by demanding a more equitable distribution of the world's goods, objectives entirely and undoubtedly legitimate. So here the Pope is saying, look, they have a point. The communists do have this point, and this is what's causing communism. There's an abuse of goods. There is an abuse of power. There's abuse of the economy that needs to change. And actually, by the way, I want to point out, if you read the Communist Manifesto, secular materialistic corporatist capitalism is actually seen as quite positively in the Communist Manifesto. People like saying, oh, capitalism versus communism. Actually, communism itself sees capitalism as the final stages before you go to a communist system. That's Marx's own analysis of the situation. The communist takes advantage of the present worldwide economic crisis to draw into the sphere of his influence even those sections of the populace which on principle reject all forms of materialism and terrorism. So it drives people. The current economic system is abusive, it's driving people to desperation, and that's what's causing it to spread. And every error contains its element of truth. The partial truths which you have affirmed are astutely presented according to the needs of time and place to conceal, when convenient, the repulsive crudity and inhumanity of communistic principles and tactics. So basically, things are not all right. Things are not okay in our system in the world today. That is something that we as Catholics need to admit. There is an unequal distribution of goods. That's spreading poverty and causing misery. That needs to be addressed, and we need to actually address it. I remember actually hearing of why Bolivia didn't go communist. And I was watching a documentary about Che Guevara's life. He was going to this country in Latin America and that country in Latin America. Finally, he came to Bolivia and wanted to start a communist revolution. Only about 20 people showed up. And I remember interviewing someone who was involved in the Bolivian government at the time. And he was asked what happened, why there wasn't a communist, why no one showed up to help Che Guevara in Bolivia. His answer was, yeah, our government had already gotten rid of these abusive practices by corporate greed, and essentially everyone in Bolivia owned their own farm. They controlled the means of production themselves. There was nothing to redistribute. As a result, Che Guevara didn't have any revolutionaries to fight on his side, and he was defeated. That's how you defeat real communism. That is how you defeat all this misery, by actually solving the problems it's pretending to address. Thus, the communist ideal wins over many of the better-minded members of the community. These, in turn, become the apostles of the movement among the younger intelligentsia, who are still too immature to recognize the intrinsic error of the system. Like, okay, guys, I'm going to talk to anyone who may be watching this who's like younger. Young voter. And this goes left and right. You're young. You're idealistic. You're great. And you want to change the world for the better. And you see the problems in your day, and you're going to go, and you want to solve them. Do not go for the first person who promises solutions. People will want to take advantage of your youth, of your strength, of your youthful enthusiasm. They'll take it, get in power, and offer you squat and give you squat in return. This goes for, I remember when I was younger, I'm a millennial, it was leftist ideology with Obama was going to save us all. Now it's Donald Trump. And in a few years, it's going to be someone else. These are all godless hedonists who will offer you diddly squat. If you are a Christian, especially of any sort, Trump is not going to save you. Harris is not going to save you, etc., etc., etc. Like, yeah, maybe, I'm not saying don't vote for either of them or anyone, but like, if you're young and if you're getting enthusiastic, yeah, this person, there's all these problems and this politician has solutions. Sit down. What is their actual plan? What is the counter argument against that? Sit down, learn to think at a young age. This is not intending to belittle you guys. Anyone who's younger, and indeed some people they're young. The people, guys my age, who honestly need to learn these critical thinking skills. But I am saying there are people who are going to want to take advantage of you and your youth and inexperience, especially in the political system. Don't run after anyone and who's claim they're just going to magically solve everything. They're not. The preachers of communism are so proficient in exploiting racial antagonisms and political divisions and oppositions. I remember a story. This one's got another story. Sorry for going on these tangents, but I remember when I was younger, I was kind of like a monarchist side of the early alt-right. Now, when I say alt-right, I want to clarify what I mean by that, because there's a lot of things people think the alt-right was, especially in like 2016, around thereabouts. The alt-right, in practice, was a collection of a bunch of conservatives who were not Reagan conservatives. That's essentially what it was. And they wanted to find alternatives to the they wanted to have a conservatism that was not sell everything that's not nailed down. You had everything in it from like neo-Nazis to concerned Christians, and like everyone involved in it knew it was eventually going to collapse, because the only thing we all had in common was that we were terrified of the left, and we thought that the Reagan-style conservatism was like destroying everything and destroying our value, any nationalistic values, whatever. What was interesting, at one point in the before you had certain racial tensions, was that it was killing racism actually within it. I actually noticed racism becoming more and more increasingly weaker as time went on, as the movement grew, because eventually you had these nationalistic right-wing First Nations groups in Canada, or Native American groups, who were tired of drugs in their neighborhoods, and they were taking to the streets. They were making their own patrols in their malls, neighborhoods, saying, "We're not bringing this here, and we're going to celebrate our nationalist ideologies." And eventually, I even had one friend who was white supremacist, and he was looking at it like, "Hey, I actually have a lot in common with these people. Hey, like I actually, they're not so bad after all." And it went on until they started going after the Confederate statues, actually. It's one of the reasons why and again, like anyone who wants to take things that the Confederate statues should come down, that's fine. I'm not a member of that collect movement any longer. But I am saying that as someone who was on the inside, when they started it was only until these people were reminded that they were supposed to be enemies because of their ethnic, racial background. The minute they actually sat down, these hardline right-wingers who were self-described racists who I met were actually getting along just fine with people of different ethnic backgrounds and races. And it was expanding until, the preachers of communism are professional exploiting racial antagonisms. Like, I actually hate real racism, and honestly, like, I honestly would love to see, would have those days again. Imagine where racism is just not a thing, neither right or the left. Real racism, where we actually hate people with different ethnic backgrounds. Unfortunately, as I'm making this, you got a lot of people who are saying, "Oh, I hate black people coming to my country. I hate Jewish people." Like, a lot of these black people who I know, I'll say there's just about every black person who I ever met, and I met and there are I met quite a few, have been like kind, intelligent, hardworking, and a lot of them have been serious, devout Christians. Even some of them have been trad cats, actually. And honestly, I think they're amazing. I wish more of them would come into the country, honestly, if they're going to be like that, if that's the case. And unfortunately, it's we're going into a world where people are more concerned about skin color than this nonsense. They just want revolution and violence for the sake of revolution and violence, which is whether you're right wing or left. If you're a right wing or left winger who seriously cares about their country and wants serious conversations about either God or love, even if you're an atheist who loves their country and wants to see it do well and cares about your fellow man, that the current developments that we're seeing right now in increasing amounts of racism is something that should make us physically sick. And I hope everyone who's watching this is Tradcath will reject this insanity and realize that, remember, Christ is King, realize that there are Tradcasts who are or black, etc., Chinese, etc., and reject and realize that racial antagonisms are being exploited by like people on the right as well. Like I said, a lot of these criticisms most of these criticisms of communism can be applied to like mainline, even a lot of right wingers in politics today. That's something I want to point out. They take advantage of lack of orientation characteristic of modern agnostic science in order to burrow into the universities where they bolster up the principles of their doctrine with pseudoscientific arguments. I can't tell if we're talking about communists or neo-Nazis today, because it honestly could apply to both. If we would explain the blind acceptance of communism by so many thousands of workmen, we must remember that the way they have already been prepared for it by the religious and moral destitution in which wage earners have been left by liberal economics. This was my favorite paragraph. Even on Sundays and holy days, labor shifts were given no time to attend to their essential religious duties. No one thought of building churches within convenient distance of factories, nor facilitating the work of the priests. Like, here's the thing, in society, even in a... I'll put it this way. Even in a pluralistic, multi-religious society, there is no reason why this should be a problem. Oh, you're Jewish. Here, I'll make sure you have Shabbos off. No, it's no problem. Hey, there are Christians who want the same thing. You can cover their shifts. Same thing with the Muslims, etc. Even the most basic level. Even at a secular... Largely, if you were to have respect to religion at all. Secular materialism has led to communism. If you hate communism and you just want earn money, guess what? According to the teaching of the Catholic Church, according to the teaching of Karl Marx, they both agree you are the seeds of communism. You are the seeds of communism if you support unrestricted exploitation of workers. And I met a lot of right-wing supposed trackouts who just love economic freedom. How dare you're communist? I want total deregulation. Yeah, you are the seeds of communism. You need to look after the religious rights of workmen, at least on Sundays. On the contrary, laicism was actively and personally promoted, with the result that we are now reaping the fruits of the errors so often announced by our predecessors and ourselves. It can surprise no one that the communistic facility should be spreading in a world already so largely de-Christianized. Yeah, secular capitalists. Oh, the communists are coming. How did this happen? Also, secular capitalists. Let's exploit the workers and separate God out of society. Except when we have them to come to bless whatever capitalistic exploitation that we're doing. If that's you, you are the founders of communism. You are the founders of communism. There is another explanation for the rapid diffusion of communistic ideas, now sleeping to every nation, great and small, advanced and backward, so that no corner of the earth is free of them. This explanation is to be found in a propaganda so truly diabolical, the world has perhaps never witnessed its like before. It has directed from one common center. It is truly adapted to the varying conditions of diverse peoples. It has at its disposal great financial resources, gigantic organizations, international congresses, countless trained workers. It makes use of pamphlets and reviews of cinema, theater, and radio, of schools and even universities. Little by little, it penetrates into all classes of people, reaches even the better-minded groups of the community. Result that few are aware of the poison which increasingly pervades their minds and hearts. Lots of... Again, this is kind of like I said, most of our society today, most of what we've read about communism as an error applies to even right-wing people in our society today. That's the majority of it. It's only like a few economic factors that would distinguish communism from secular liberals. And by liberals, I don't mean leftists. I mean like secular classical liberalism. Supported by group people like Pierre Pius in Canada, by Maxime Bernier in Canada, and even Donald Trump to a certain degree. A third powerful factor is the diffusion of communism is the conspiracy of silence on the part of a large section of the non-Catholic press of the world. Well, it's not that big of a deal. We say conspiracy because it is impossible otherwise to explain how a press, usually so eager to exploit even the little daily incidents of life, has been able to remain silent for so long about the horrors perpetrated in Russia, in Mexico, and even a great part of Spain, that it should have relatively so little to say concerning a world organization as vast as Russian communism. This silence is due, in part, to short-sighted political policy. I remember, even though he was a socialist, George Orwell actually wrote Animal Farm. Definitely read the book. Talk about the errors and dangers of the dictatorship of the Soviet Union. As I recall, he was being censored at the time because, the short-sighted policy was, Stalin is our ally during World War II. And is favored by various occult forces a long time and have been working to overthrow the Christian social order. Meanwhile, the sorry effects of this propaganda are before our eyes, where communism has been able to assert its power, and here we're thinking with special affection of the people of Russia and Mexico, and has striven by every possible means, as its champions open boastfully, destroy Christian civilization and the Christian religion by banishing every remembrance of them from the hearts of men. Where I live, this has largely been accomplished, especially the young. Bishops and priests were exiled. Where I live, there's really no priests or bishops to exile. Condemned to forced labor. Shot and done to death in inhuman fashion. Like in North Korea, for example, it's only like a few years ago that the bishop of Pyongyang was declared dead. He was speared away by the communists during when the communists took over North Korea, and no one ever heard of him again. We presume he's dead. There's never been an official confirmation by the government. Were vexed, persecuted, dragged off to trial, and thrown into prison. Even where the scourge of communism has not yet had time enough to exercise its full logical effects, as witness our beloved Spain, it has at last found compensation in the fierce violence of its attacks. Not only this or that church or isolated monastery was sacked, but as far as possible, every church and every monastery was destroyed. Every vestige of Christian religion was eradicated, even through intimately linked with the rarest monuments of art and science. Like I remember when in Russia they rebuilt St. Saviour's Cathedral, and how controversial it was that they're building this church. Well, I remember hearing some when this group Pussy Riot was arrested, and people were saying, "Oh, they didn't do that big of a deal. It's not a real historic church." The argument was, it's not a historic church. It was only recently rebuilt because the previous St. Saviour's Cathedral had been blown up by the communists to make way for a pleasure palace for Stalin. That was never built and left to be a swamp for years. And eventually most people in Russia just wanted their old cathedral back, so the government rebuilt the church that they had destroyed. Which honestly they should have. Sounds like a fair reparation. You destroy our church, okay, we will rebuild it as it was before. So it's not that big deal. Like, they were destroying a lot of things. They were destroying a ton of stuff. People talk about, like, Taliban destroyed those Buddhas in Afghanistan, which was horrible. Like, destroying cultural monuments is terrible. But let's not forget that communism was doing the exact same thing. The theory of communism has not confined itself to the indiscriminate slaughter of bishops, of thousands of priests and religious of both sexes. It searches out above all those who have been devoting lives to the welfare of the working class and the poor. But the majority of its victims have been laymen of all conditions and classes, even up to the present moment. Masses of them are slain almost daily for no other offense than the fact that they are good Christians, or at least opposed to atheistic communism. And this fearful destruction has been carried out with a hatred and a savage barbarity one would not have believed possible in our age. No man of good sense, nor any statesman conscious of his responsibility, can fail to shudder at the thought what is happening today. In Spain, may perhaps be repeated tomorrow in other civilized countries. Nor can it be said that these atrocities are a transitory phenomenon. The usual accompaniment of all great revolutions, the isolated excesses common to every war. No, they are the natural fruit of a system which lacks all inner restraint. Some restraint is necessary for man, considered either as an individual or in society. Even the barbaric peoples had this inner check in the natural law written by God in their heart of every man. And where the natural law was held in higher esteem, ancient nations rose to grandeur that still fascinates, more than it should, certain superficial students of human history. But tear the very idea of God from the hearts of men. They are necessarily urged by their passions, most atrocious barbarity. Unfortunately, this is what we now behold. For the first time in human history, we are witnessing a struggle, cold-blooded and purpose, and mapped out into the least detail between man and all that is called God. Communism, by its nature, anti-religious, it considers religion as the opiate of the people because the principles of religion, which speak of a life beyond the grave, dissuade the proletariat from the dream of a Soviet paradise which is of this world. But the law of nature and its author cannot be flouted with impunity. Communism has not been able, it will not be able to achieve its objectives even in the merely economic sphere. And indeed, let's be honest, that's kind of been proven true. Like, there's a reason why the communist Soviet Russia collapsed. Why Stalin was not seen as or Mao is not seen across the world as a great hero. Even in China, they say, well, Mao was mostly right. He also caused the death of millions, but he was mostly right. It is true that in Russia, it has been a contributing factor to rousing men and materials from the inertia of centuries and obtaining by all manner of means, often without scruple, some measure of material success. Nevertheless, know from reliable and even very recent testimony that not even there, in spite of slavery imposed on millions of men, work gulags, essentially, which literally were a thing. There's a reason. Please look up gulags. Has communism reached its promised goal? After all, even the sphere of economics needs some morality, some sense of responsibility, which can find no place in a system so thoroughly materialistic as communism. Economic systems need morality. It needs to be regulated. Radical materialism that dehumanizes people is bad. That's what why is communism bad? Why is communism bad? This is why. You cannot defeat communism by practicing its errors. Talking to you, to any secular capitalists who want total deregulation of everything. Terrorism is the only possible substitute, and it is terrorism that reigns today in Russia, where former comrades in revolution are exterminating each other. Again, that was quite famous with Stalin's purges. Terrorism, having failed despite all to stem the tide of moral corruption, cannot even prevent the dissolution of society itself. In making these observations, it is no part of our intention to condemn en masse the people of the Soviet Union. Again, this is something that I wish people today would do. Look. There's so many people just labeling entire nations as being the problem. Nazis are German. Americans are evil. Nazis are all Germans are Nazis. Americans are all evil secular Freemasons. All Chinese are communists. Just destroy the nation, etc., etc. No, we are called to love our neighbor. Quote, for we cherish them with warmest paternal affection. Most of the Soviet Union was not Catholic. The majority religion was either Eastern Orthodox or some other native religion or Islam or some Catholics here or there. We cherish these atheists, these schismatic Orthodox, with the warmest paternal affection. We are called to love our neighbor, even when they are oppressed by errors, and even when they hold other errors themselves. We are well aware that not a few of them groan beneath the yoke imposed on them by men who in a very large part are strangers to the real interests of the country. Recognize that many others were deceived by fallacious hopes. Even people who were all for communism and brought their country to its knees, warmest paternal affection. Something that we need to remember when we deal with radical racists, people who are involved in Antifa, people who are involved in these extreme leftist movements and anti-Christian movements. Paternal, warm affection. What do we blame? Quote, we blame only the system, which is authors and abettors who considered Russia to be the best prepared field for experimenting with a plan elaborated decades ago, and who from there continue to spread it from one end of the world to the other. We have exposed the errors of the violent, deceptive tactics of both Bolshevistic and atheistic communism. It is now time, better brethren, to contrast with the true notion, already familiar to you, of the civilitas humana, or human society, as taught by reason and revelation to the mouth of the Church. Magisterium Genitum. Above other reality, there exists one supreme being, God. Even collectivist societies that have worked before, like in ancient Sparta, which, by the way, was super collectivistic. That was redistribution of goods was tried also in Athens. Note, it worked. I'll point out that in Sparta, it was actually only equality for a few elites. And and they did do redistribution of goods among the actual people, more like the Libyans did. It wasn't all. There was a government-owned mine because it's such an important resource in ancient Athens, but most of the land was, when they had this problem, was distributed among the common people in each other own private plot. And that's how they prevented a revolution like that in ancient Athens. The omnipotent creator of all beings, the all-wise, and all these nations were at least theistic. There was a notion of you serve the gods in ancient Greece. This supreme God, reality, God is the absolute condemnation of all impudent falsehoods of communism and truth. It is not because men believe in God that he exists, rather because he exists to all men whose eyes are not deliberately closed to truth, believe in him and pray to him. In the encyclical, in the encyclical on Christian education, we explain the fundamental doctrine concerning man, as it may be gathered from reason and faith. Man has a spiritual, immortal soul. He is a person, marvelously endowed by his Creator with gifts of mind and body. He is true microcosm, as the ancient said, in a world in miniature, with a value far surpassing that of vast inanimate cosmos. God alone is his last end, and for this life and the next. Human beings do not exist to be exploited. It doesn't matter if you privatize it or collectivize it. Human beings are not made to be exploited. It doesn't matter with a pretext. It doesn't matter who they're... Even if they follow false religion. Even if they go to these errors of communism, they have inherent value. Thinking human beings do not have inherent value is toxic and contrary to church teaching, and is probably the source of most of the world's misery today. By sanctifying grace, he is raised the dignity of a son of God, incorporated into the kingdom of God by the mystical body of Christ. In consequence, he has been endowed by God with many and varied prerogatives: the right to life, to bodily integrity, to the necessary means of existence, the right to tend towards his ultimate goal in the path marked to him by God, the right of association, and the right to possess and use property. So we actually do have like a Bill of Rights of humanity in paragraph 27 of the encyclical bill and the encyclical against communism. The right to life, to bodily integrity, not having to necessary means of existence. You don't have a right to food and water. No, you have a right to the means of existence. I remember it was a while ago, there was some people trying to argue people don't have a right to water. No, you need water to exist. You have a right to it. The right to tend towards the ultimate goal, the path marked out for him by God, the right to follow the true religion, the right of association, the right to possess and use property. You have a right to own things and to obtain it, to have access to it and to be able to do so. Just as matrimony and the right to its natural use are of divine origin, so likewise are the constitution and fundamental prerogatives of the family fixed and determined by the Creator. In the encyclical on Christian marriage, in our other encyclical on education cited above, we have treated these topics at considerable length. But God has likewise destined man for civil society, according to the dictates of his very nature. The plan of the Creator society is the natural means of which we can and must use to reach his destined end. Society is for man and not vice versa. This must be understood in the sense of liberalistic individualism, which subordinates society to the selfish use of the individual. So in other words, so let's go over that again. But God has likewise destined man for civil society. We are supposed to live in community, according to the dictates of his very nature. The plan of the Creator society is a natural means by which man can and must use to reach his destined end. We need each other. Society is for man and not vice versa. This must not be understood. So society is for the individual. However, this must not be understood in the sense of liberalistic individualism. I know a lot of people who think this, which subordinates society to the selfish use of the individual, only in the sense that by means of an organic union of society and a mutual collaboration, the attainment of earthly happiness is placed within the reach of all. So we're all supposed to help each other to attain happiness in an earthly sphere of things. That is what we are supposed to do, that we're supposed to believe. So love your neighbor. You are not disposable, and your neighbor is not disposable. In a further sense, it is society which affords the opportunities for the development of all the individual and social gifts bestowed on human nature. These natural gifts have a value surpassing their immediate interests of the moment, for in society they reflect the divine perfection. Which would not be were it true were men to live alone. But in final analysis, even in this latter fusion, society is made for man, that he may recognize this reflection of God's perfection, for it in praise and adoration to the Creator. Only man, the human person, and not society in any form, is endowed with reason and a morally free will. Man cannot be exempt from divinely imposed obligations towards civil society. So yes, you have obligations to civil society. The representatives of this authority have the right to coerce him when he refuses without reason to do his duty. I know a lot of people who are... I know I'm not going to get a debate on things that have gone in the past years over 2020, but there are definitely a lot of people on the right who do not want to pay taxes at all, who openly, as a matter of fact, say that they have no right to help people, that government cannot tell them to do no matter what, and radical libertarians. Yeah. Read chapter 30 of the Papal Decree Against Atheistic Communism. Representatives of the authority have the right to coerce him when he refuses without reason to do his duty. Society, on the other hand, cannot defraud man of his God-granted rights, as mentioned above, the most important of which we indicated above, nor can society systematically void these rights by making their use impossible. What are those rights? Freedom of association, the right to serve God, the right to own property, etc. Reread paragraph 27. It is therefore, according to the dictates of reason, that ultimately all material things should be ordained to man as a person, that through his mediation they may find their way to their Creator. In this wise, we can apply to man, the human person, the words of the Apostle of the Gentiles who writes to the Corinthians on the Christian economy of salvation. All things are yours, and you are Christ's, and Christ is God's. While communism impoverishes human personality by inverting the terms of the revelation of man's society, to what lofty heights is man not elevated by reason and revelation? Divine principles concerning the social economic order have been expounded on the social encyclical of Leo XIII, the question of labor. That's Rerum Novarum. Our own encyclical on the reconciliation of social order adapted these principles to present needs, then insisting anew on the age-old doctrine of the Church concerning the individual, social character, private property, we explain clearly the right and dignity of labor, the relations of mutual aid and collaboration which should exist between those who possess capital and those who work, the salary due in strict justice to the worker of for himself and his family. So, like, minimum wage is a right, essentially. In the same encyclical of ours, we have shown that the means of saving the world of today from the lamentable ruin to which moral liberalism has plunged us are neither the class struggle nor terror, nor yet the autocratic abuse of state power, but rather the infusion of social justice, a term that has been ruined today, unfortunately, a sentiment of Christian love and just the social economic order. Implement Christian sentiment of Christian love. We need, as Catholics, need to stop looking to right-wing ideologies. We need to stop looking, and I know some guys who are into classical liberalism, which has been roundly condemned. I'm seeing people go into atheistic communism, go into like even fascism, Nazism, which has been condemned. I'm a monarchist myself, but like I know that has limits. And by the way, people on the left who may be watching this, I don't want to let me remind you that this entire decree is about your pet secular ideology and is condemning it. I'm calling out the right wingers to remind them that they are as bad as you are. We have indicated how a sound and your ideology has been experimented with and proven to be a false hope. Period. We have indicated how a sound prosperity is to be restored according to the true principles of a sane cooperative system, which respects the proper hierarchical structure of society. You're not going to get rid of hierarchy. Let's use it to your advantage. All the occupational groups should be fused into harmonious unity by the principle of the common good. It's not about how you can own the libs. It's not about oppressing the employer, crushing your employer. It's not about how you can bilk as much as you can out of your employee. Common good. The genuine chief function of public and civil society authority consists precisely on the efficacious furthering of this harmony and coordination of all social forces. View this organized common effort toward peaceful living. Catholic doctrine vindicates the state the dignity and authority of a vigilant and provident defender of those divine human rights on which the sacred scriptures, Fathers of the Church insists on so often. It is not true that all have equal rights in civil society. I.e., it is not true that all have equal rights. We are not all equal. Fully egalitarian societies are not good. Yes, the government does get to tell you what to do. It is not true there exists no lawful hierarchy in society. Let it suffice to read the encyclicals of Leo XIII. Again, Roman Novarum, already cited especially to that on state powers. You have to obey the government. While there's on the Christian constitution of the states. And these documents, the Catholic will find the principles of reason and faith and clearly explained. These principles will enable him to defend himself against the errors of a perils of a communist conception of the state, the enslavement of man, despoiled of his rights, and the denial of the transcendental origin of the state and its authority. The horrible use of power in the service of a collectivistic terrorism, but it's notably communism, which again, like like I mentioned before, collectivistic common good, yes. The pseudo collectivism of the communists, where you have a dictatorship of bureaucrats who just pretend that everything is held in common, are the very contrary to all that corresponds with natural ethics, will of the Creator. Both man and civil society derive their origin from the Creator, who has mutually ordained them one for the other. Hence, neither can be exempted from their corrective obligations, nor deny or diminish each other's rights. The Creator himself has regulated the mutual relationship of its fundamental lines. It is by unjust usurpation that communism abrogates to itself the right to enforce, in place of divine law based on immutable principles of truth and charity, a partisan political program which arises from arbitrary human will and is replete with hate. The government can do whatever it wants because you're in the government's way, therefore I can do what I want. Teaching with this enlightened doctrine, the Church has no other intention than to realize the glad tidings some of the angels above the cave of Bethlehem, Redeemer's birth. Glory to God, and on the earth peace to men. True peace, true happiness, even here below, as far as is possible in preparation for the happiness of heaven. But to men of goodwill, this doctrine is equally removed from all extremes of error, all exaggerations of parties or systems which stem from error. It maintains constant equilibrium of truth and justice, and it vindicates in theory and applies and promotes in practice, bringing to harmony the rights and duties of all parties. Thus, authority is reconciled with liberty, the dignity of the individual with that of the state, the human personality of the subject with the divine delegation of the superior. Everyone has a certain dignity. The government has a dignity. The state has dignity. The individual has liberty. Everyone has a certain reflection of God. In this way, a balance struck between the due dependence, will-ordered love of a man for himself, his family and his country, and his love for other families and other peoples. We are supposed to love other nations. It's founded on the love of God. balance is struck between due dependence. We're not totally free of the government. We need the government. We need human society. And well-ordered love of a man for himself. We are to love ourselves. Just offering yourself for the sake of the common good is not a Catholic notion. His family and country. You are to love your family and your country. His love for other families, other people. Again, a combination of genuine racism in a certain sense, or thinking that my country is so wonderful I can therefore attack other nations. No, you can't. Why? Because found in the love of God. I love my nation because it's my country. God placed me here. It's a certain paternal right over me, and I love it. And other countries are obliged to love their nation the same way, and I should respect that. The Father of all, their first principle in the last end, the Church does not separate a proper regard for temporal welfare from solicitude for the eternal. She subordinates the former to the latter according to the words of the divine founder. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his justice. All these things should be added to you. She is nevertheless so far from being unconcerned with human affairs, so far from hindering civil progress and material advancement, that she actually fosters and promotes them in the most sensible and efficacious manner. Thus, even in the sphere of social economics, although the Church has never proposed to define a technical system, thus, even the sphere of economics, social economics, although the Church has never proposed a definite technical system, since this is not her field, like, here's the thing, like, there is a lot of wiggle room when it comes to government and the economic systems. I often say, what's my economic ideology? I don't have one. Situations, governments, time, place changes, and the rules of the game are going to change from time to place. But there are certain rules that you need to operate within. Communists tend to be very dogmatic. Capitalists tend to be very dogmatic about how free market will save them all. Communists will say, oh, government, socialized welfare will save them all. Truth is, you're going to need to balance them. In my personal opinion, you're going to need to balance them. It's going to how much is going to change from time to time, to place. Love of God and love of neighbor to triumph, and you need to have a certain balance. You cannot totally strip away human individual economic freedom, but you also need the collective to look out for one another and care for their mutual happiness. Those are the rules. She has nevertheless clearly outlined the guiding principles which, while susceptible to varied concrete applications according to the diversified conditions of time and place and peoples that I already mentioned, indicate the safe way of securing happy progress of society. The wisdom and supreme utility of this doctrine are admitted by all who really understand it. With good reason, outstanding statesmen have asserted that, after a study of various social systems, they have found nothing sounder than the principles expounded in encyclicals Rerum Novarum and Quas Agimus Ranimo. In non-Catholic, even in non-Christian countries, many recognize the great value society of the social doctrine of the Church. Thus, scarcely a month ago, an eminent political figure from the Far East, a non-Christian, did not hesitate to affirm publicly that the Church, with a doctrine of peace and Christian brotherhood, is rendering a signal contribution to the difficult task of establishing and maintaining peace among nations. Catholics, can we please stop going after William of Buckley, Karl Marx, and all these other secular ideologies, right-wing, left-wing, and start looking at Catholic teaching? Please. We have something that's unique and useful, and that is going to be better than whatever is currently on the table. Let's embrace it, let's use it, let's share it with others. And stop these insane notions. Following now from reliable information that flows into the center of Christendom from all parts of the world, that the communists themselves, where they are not so utterly depraved, recognize the superiority of the social doctrine of the Church when once explained to them over the doctrines of their leaders and their teachers. Look, I met people who describe themselves as Marxist professors. When you actually talk to them about Rerum Novarum, what it actually says, left and right, they'll admit it's a very moderate doctrine, it's a sane doctrine, it's probably a good doctrine. We wish it was in society. I think even reading Karl Marx in his Communist Manifesto, we actually commented on it. he said people just don't put it in practice, and that's why it doesn't work, is a big problem. But he himself had even Marx had a lot of good to say about Catholic ideas and general Christian ideas on social justice. It does work if it's put into practice. Only those blinded by passion and hatred close their eyes to the light of truth and obstinately struggle against it, which unfortunately is a lot of people, unfortunately a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics today, unfortunately. A lot of Catholics will read secular documents and will not read the teachings of the church, as though it has nothing good to say on these matters. If you're willing to read the Communist Manifesto and are Catholic, or William F. Buckley, you can and should read these documents. But the enemies of the church, though forced to acknowledge the wisdom of her doctrine, accuse her of having failed to act in conformity with her principles. From this, they conclude to the necessity of seeking other solutions. Yeah, because no one can ever say that no communist has ever failed to live up to their principles. The utter falseness and injustice of this accusation is shown by the whole history of Christianity. For only to a single historical trait, it was Christianity that first affirmed the real universal brotherhood of all men, whatever race and condition. That is true. This doctrine she proclaimed by method which has an amplitude and conviction unknown to preceding centuries. True. I read ancient history. People did not even talk about their own brotherhood of their own children. In many cases. And with it, she potently contributed to the abolition of slavery. Again, also true. I plan on making another video soon on those decrees. And if you want to roll your eyes at that, read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Famous anti-slavery novel that led to the abolition of slavery in the United States. Reads like a Sunday school lesson, and it operates on the presumption that there are divine laws from the Bible, from the Christian God, that say slavery is wrong. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Slavery is just a horrible condition. It is toxic. It is dangerous. At best, is a grave occasion for abuse and violence, and it needs to go. And with it, she potently contributed to abolition of slavery. Read Suarez. Not bloody revolution, but the inner force of her teaching made the proud Roman matron see her slave as a sister in Christ. Talk about Saints Perpetua and Saint Felicity. It is Christianity that adores the Son of God, made man for love of man, and become not only the son of a carpenter, but himself a carpenter. It was Christianity that raised manual labor to its true dignity, whereas it had hitherto been so despised that even the moderate Cicero didn't hesitate to sum up the general opinion of his time in words of which any modern sociologist would be ashamed. All artisans are engaged in sordid trades. There can be nothing ennobling about a workshop. Even a university. Even professors who weren't Christian would say, you know what, the Catholic Church did do a lot to bring society along. Even if they thought it can't take us all the way, they did give credit where it was due to university. Faithful to these principles, the Church has given new life to human society. Under her influence arose prodigious charitable organizations, great guilds of artisans and working men of every type. These guilds, ridiculed as medieval by liberalism of the last century, are today claiming the admiration of our contemporaries in many countries who are endeavoring to revive them in some modern form. When other systems hindered her work, raised obstacles to salutary influence of the Church, she has never done wrong, warning them of their error. We need but recall with what constant firmness and energy our predecessor, Leo XIII, vindicated for the working man the right to organize. Yes, you can make unions. Our predecessor, Leo XIII, vindicated for working men the right to organize. How dare the Church get involved in economics? Yeah, the Church has the right to judge the world. in its teaching. I know a lot of secular liberal conservatives would hate this, but that is the truth. Which the dominant liberalism of the more powerful states relentlessly denied him. Even today, the authority of this church doctrine is greater than it seems, for the influence of ideas in the realm of facts, although invisible, are not easily measured, is surely of predominant importance. May be said in all truth that the church, like Christ, goes through the centuries doing good to all. There would be today neither socialism nor communism if the rules of the nations had not scorned the teachings and maternal warnings, multiple times I might add, of the church, listed many of the warnings above, I might add. On the basis of liberalism and laicism, they wish to build other social edifices. Again, I know so many, they're calling out where the real origin of communism is from, liberalism, laicism, that they wish to build, on which they wish to build other edifices, which, powerful and imposing as they seemed at first, all too soon revealed their weakness of their foundations. I know so many trackcasts have gone on this road. They forget, like, classical liberalism is not in line with the Catholic faith. It needs to be rejected. Classical liberalism is a sin. It is the seed of communism, according to both the analysis of both Pius XI and according to Karl Marx himself in his Communist Manifesto. And they will hate this and say the church is dead of it. I don't care about what the church teaches. I just want to make money. I'm an economist, etc. I met there used to be a trackath who went to my church like that. He eventually hated it here where I live and went back to where he was from in Alberta. But yeah, this is what the church teaches. Classical liberalism and capitalism and freedom of making money and unrestricted is something that we need to be against as much as communism. Even if you just take communism, it is the foundation of communism. We need to reject unrestrained capitalism completely. Today are crumbling one after another before our eyes, as everything must crumble that is not grounded on the one cornerstone, which is Christ Jesus. If you want it to last, you want it to be good, it has to be founded upon Christ Jesus. Separation of church and state has been a disaster to even secular human justice. Completely disastrous. This, venerable brethren, is the doctrine of the church, which alone is this, venerable brethren, is the doctrine of the church, which alone, in the social as in other fields, can offer real light and assurance of salvation in the face of communistic ideology. But this doctrine must be consistently reduced to practice in everyday life. According to the admonition of St. James the Apostle, be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. The most urgent need of the present day is therefore the energetic and timely application of remedies which will effectively ward off the catastrophe that grows daily more threatening. We cherish the firm hope that the fanaticism which these sons of darkness work day and night, all of the materialistic and atheistic propaganda, again, materialistic and atheistic, yea, separation of church and state society is about making money. That's pretty much everything in society today. But tells you how deep it is running. I remember watching a line, The Nerdy Christian, talk about the separation of church and state, how wonderful it is. He's not a Christian. Propaganda will at least serve the holy purpose of stimulating the sons of light to like an even greater zeal for the honor of divine majesty. We need to, in practice, things we can all do. Put aside the racist propaganda. Put aside your anti-Semitic propaganda. Yeah, I've seen so many people online lately. I've had some people block me because I refuse to praise them and say no, and tell them that they're going on ranting a lot about hating Jewish people is wrong. I've had people be mad at me because I said I don't want to hear racist propaganda. Not interested in hearing it. I believe in love of neighbor. I've got, especially Americans, mad at me because, even American Christians, because I told them no, separation of church and state is not in line with the law of God in the Bible. Well, the law of the land says here, the law of God says something different. We as Catholics need to sit down and realize this is heresy. We need to reject it. Lay aside, stop the atheistic memes. Stop the racist memes. Read Catholic social teaching. The best way to implement the solution is to know the solution. And talk about it. And my gosh, Trackcats, I've seen you online. You talk endlessly. I've seen you endlessly talk about Trump. I've seen you endlessly talk about Pierre Poilievre, the economy, and food prices, etc. You know what's something you could talk about? Actual Catholic teaching. Why not? Why might not understand it? Well, it's your job to understand it. And if or at the very least, it's your job to understand it. If you're going to be talking about matters that it touches on. I don't want to hear any more people talk about race if they're not going to line up their racial ideology in line with the teachings of the church. And random Googling things is not on why racism is good from a Catholic standpoint is not going to be okay. Read these decrees. What then must be done? What remedies must be employed to defend Christ and Christian civilization from this pernicious enemy? As father in the midst of his family, we should like to speak quite intimately of those duties which the great struggles of our day imposes on all the children of the church. We would address our paternal admonition even to those sons who have strayed far from her. As in all the storm periods of church history of the church, the fundamental remedy today lies in sincere renewal of private and public life according to the principles of the gospel. By all those who belong to the fold of Christ, they may be ensure the salt of the earth, preserve human society from total corruption. With heart deeply grateful to the Father of light, from whom descends every best and gift and every perfect gift. We see on all sides consoling signs of this spiritual renewal. We see it not only in so many singular chosen souls, and who these last years have been elevated to the sublime heights of sanctity, and in so many others who with generous hearts are making their way towards the same luminous goal, but also in the flowering of a deep and practical piety in all classes of society, even the most cultured, as we point out in our recent motu proprio in Motu Solis, October 28th, the last occasion for recognition of the Pontifical Academy of the reorganization on the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Nevertheless, we cannot deny that there is still much to be done in the way of spiritual innovation. Even in Catholic countries, there are still too many who are Catholics hardly more than in name. There are too many who fill more or less faithfully the more essential obligations of religion they boast of professing, but have no desire of knowing it better, of deepening their inward conviction, and still less of bringing into conformity with the external goals the inner splendor of right and unsullied conscience. Again, I already mentioned this. Know the faith, share the faith. Simple as that. That recognized performs all its duties under the eye of God. We know how much our divine Savior detested this empty pharisaic show. If you are going after these secular ideologies and rambling on about them, not interested in learning what the church teaches, empty pharisaic show. He who wished that all should adore the Father in spirit and truth, the Catholic who does not live really and sincerely according to the faith he professes, will not long be master of himself in these days when the winds of strife persecution blow so fiercely, but will be swept away defenseless in this new deluge which threatens the world, and thus, while he is preparing his own ruin, he is exposing to ridicule the very name of And here we wish, venerable brethren, insist more particularly on two teachings of our Lord, which have a special bearing the present condition of the human race: detachment from earthly goods and the precept of charity. In other words, don't be freaking greedy and love your neighbor. You think that's quite simple? It's nothing advanced. Like that's 90% of why. That's 90% of the problem of communism and of classical liberalism. It's like this dehumanization of everything. Blessed are the poor in this greed and lack of love of neighbor. Blessed are the poor in spirit, were the first words that fell from the lips of our divine master in a Sermon on the Mount. This lesson is more than ever necessary in these days of materialism, a thirst for the goods and pleasures of this earth. All Christians, rich or poor, must keep their eyes fixed on heaven, remembering that we have not here a lasting city, but we seek one that is to come. The rich do not place their happiness in things of this earth. So many secular capitalists who talk about the economy and everything in those days, or spend their best efforts in acquisition of them, rather than considering themselves only as stewards of their earthly goods. Let them be mindful of the account they must render of them to their Lord and Master. Value them as precious means that God has put into their hands for doing good. Let them not fail, besides, to distribute to their abundance to the poor, according to the evangelical precept. Otherwise, there shall be verified of them and their riches the harsh condemnation of St. James the Apostle. Go ye now, rich men, weep and howl in your miseries which shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be for testimony against you, and shall eat your flesh like fire. You have stored up for yourselves wrath against the last days. Do good to those in need, but to the poor too, in their turn, while engaged according to laws of charity and justice, acquiring the necessities of life, also bettering their condition, should always remain poor in spirit. I remember hearing many years ago when the Occupy movement was going on. I remember listening to a podcast that analyzed, I'm not sure if it still goes on, the movement from a Catholic perspective. Basically, the Occupy movement was right in analyzing the current system we have as a system of greed and corruption. But the problem with the Occupy movement is that they wanted to replace it with another system of greed and corruption, and it wasn't that good. So that's something that we should keep in mind. Hold spiritual goods in higher esteem than earthly property and pleasures. Then remember that the world will never be able to rid itself of sorrow, misery, sorrow, and tribulation, which are the portion even of those who seem most prosperous. Patience, therefore, is the need of all. That Christian patience which conforms the heart, the divine assurance of eternal happiness. Be patient, therefore, brethren. Repeat with St. James, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruits of the earth, patiently bearing until he receive the earthly and latter rain. Be you therefore also patient, and strengthen your hearts. The coming of the Lord is at hand. Only thus will be filled the consoling promise of the Lord. Blessed are the poor. These words are no vain consolation, a promise as empty as those of the communists. They are the words of life, pregnant with a solemn reality. They are fully verified here on earth, as well as in eternity. Indeed, I know of many of the poor, anticipation of the kingdom of heaven, have already proclaimed their own, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. And binding these words of happiness, so many of the wealthy, uneasy with their riches, and ever thirsting for more, look for in vain. Still, more important as a remedy for the evil we are considering, are certainly more directly calculated to cure it, is a precept of charity. We have in mind that Christian charity, patient and kind, should voice all semblance of demeaning paternalism, all ostentation, that charity, which from the very beginning of Christianity won to Christ the poorest of the poor, the slaves. We are grateful to all the members of charitable associations, from the conferences of St. Vincent de Paul to the recent Great Relief organizations, which are perseveringly practicing the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. More the working men and the poor realize what the spirit of love animated by the virtue of Christ is doing for them. More readily will they abandon their false persuasion that Christianity has lost its efficacy and that the church stands on the side of the exploiters of their labor. But when, on the one hand, we see thousands of the needy, victims of real misery for the various reasons beyond their control, the other, so many round about them who spend huge sums of money on useless things and frivolous amusement, we cannot fail to remark with sorrow not only that justice is poorly observed, but that the precept of charity also is not sufficiently appreciated. It is not a vital thing in daily life. We desire, therefore, venerable brethren, that this divine precept, this precious mark of identification led by Christ to his true disciples, be ever more fully explained by pen and word of mouth. This precept which teaches us to see those who suffer Christ himself and would have us love our brothers as our divine Savior has loved us, that even for the sacrifice of ourselves, if it need be, of our life, let all that then frequently meditate on those words, the final sentence, so consoling yet so terrifying, which the supreme judge will pronounce on the day of the last judgment. Come, ye blessed my Father, for I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. Amen, I say to you, as long as it's one of these, my least brethren, you did it to me. In the reverse, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire. For I was hungry, you gave me not to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me not to drink. Amen, I say to you, as long as you did it not to one of these least, neither did you do it to me. To be sure of eternal life, therefore, to be able to help the poor effectively, it is imperative to return to a more moderate way of life. To renounce the joys, often sinful, which world holds out in such abundance, to forget self for love of neighbor. There is a divine regenerating force in this new precept, as Christ called it, of Christian charity. Its faithful observance will pour into the heart an inner peace which the world knows not, and will finally cure the ills which oppress humanity. But charity will never be true charity unless it takes justice into constant account. Paul teaches that he that loveth his neighbor hath fulfilled the law. He gives reason. Thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, and there be any other commandment, it is imposed by the word. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Honestly, a lot of it is like, look after the needy among you. Like, honestly, honest opinion, we as traditional Catholics, one thing I'd like to see happen someday, preferably sooner rather than later, at least where there are SSPX priories, see a traditionalist version of the St. Vincent de Paul Society is brought about. Where I live, even in my small town, the Novus Ordo version of it does a lot of good to those in need. Even my family has received quite a bit of help from them over the years. And it has been a profound blessing. It has caused a lot of respect for the Catholics in my community, Novus Ordo modernists though they may be. And honestly, I think that is something that we as traditional Catholics should do. It's a movement that is endorsed by the Church in the Gospels. Like it's been blessed pre-Vatican II multiple times over. Bible, Amos the Magisterium, etc., etc. It is a legitimate form of spirituality, helping the poor directly. And I know there are a lot of, I know in my area, I live in a rather isolated area. There are a lot of lay Catholics who would probably love to get involved in it. So if you're watching this, anyone's watching this, and you happen to be near a priory, maybe be that person who starts it up again. I know we have, as Trackcast over the years, have just been trying to survive, but a lot of us do have stable priories. Maybe someone in St. Mary's in Kansas. I guarantee you there's probably some poor family in St. Mary's, Kansas. Maybe that would be a good place to start with a Catholic fodder. Start a St. Vincent de Paul Society. Help the poor people in St. Mary's, Kansas, or fellow Trackhouse. And from there, start getting other priories, start their own traditional Catholic St. Vincent de Paul Societies. And if people can't support it financially, out in the missions, ask them to please pray for the success of it. So people are at least aware that this is something that Trads are doing, something good, and maybe be inspired as things get better in their locale to start things there. According to the apostle, then, all the commandments, including those which are of strict justice, as those which forbid us to kill or steal, may be reduced to a single precept of true charity. This it follows that a charity that deprives the workman of the salary to which a strict title injustice is not charity at all, but only its empty name and hollow semblance. The wage earner is not to receive as alms what is his due in justice. And by the way, like, people talk about communist societies. Oh, it's tough here. Like, no, communist societies are far worse than anything we've seen in Canada or the United States today. It's especially under Stalin. It was literal famine under Stalin. Not hard food prices, which tends to go up and down. Like, no, like literal famine. Let no one attempt with trifling charitable donations to exempt himself from the great duties imposed by justice. Both justice and charity often dictate obligations touching the same subject matter, but under different aspects. The very dignity of the working man makes him justly and acutely sensitive to the duties of others in this regard. So I know of a Nova Scotia parish, talk about social justice quite a bit, and this is legendary among Nova Scotia parishes, by the way. They would pay their organist well below what the standard pay is for most organists in other churches. I know of this one family that had a single mother, had to leave an abusive husband, wife and kids. They gave her a raise of $5 as they knew she was struggling, living on food handouts most of the time because that's what she needed to do. And as they gave her I think it was like $2 to $5 raise, it was like $2 raise. They said, don't spend that $5 all in one place, and will literally insult her. Complete lack of justice, complete lack of charity. Completely. Therefore, we turn again in a special way to you, Christian employers and industrialists, whose problem is often so difficult for the reason that you are saddled with the heavy heritage of an unjust economic regime. One of the reasons that can be so hard to get out of economic social injustice is that we are in a system that rewards injustice, whose ruinous influences have been felt through many generations. We bid you be mindful of your responsibility. It is unfortunately true that the manner of acting in certain Catholic circles has done much to shake the faith of the working class in the religion of Jesus Christ. These groups have refused to understand that Christian charity depends the recognition of other certain rights due to the working man, the Church has explicitly acknowledged. What is to be thought of the action of those Catholic employers who in one place succeeded in preventing the reading of our encyclical Quadragesimo Anno in their local churches? I know a lot of Tradcasts who would sadly do this, unfortunately, who I've met. A lot who would want to hear it, and a lot of would insist that these decrees be read. But they do exist even today. Or those Catholic industrialists we even to this day have shown themselves hostile to labor movement to the labor movement that we ourselves recommended. Is it not deplorable that the right of private property defended by the Church should so often have been used as a weapon to defraud the working man of his just salary and his social rights? Yes, unions are a right. In reality, besides communicative justice, there is also a social justice with its own set of obligations. And by the way, this is an attack on communism, and it is blaming a lot of Catholic employers for not doing their duty to the poor, and they're saying that's why communism is rising and spreading. In reality, besides communicative justice, there is also social justice with its own set of obligations, which neither employer nor working man can escape. Now it is of the very essence of social justice to demand for each individual all that is necessary for the common good. But just as in the living organism, it is impossible to provide for the good of the whole unless each single part and each individual member is given what it needs for the existence of its particular functions. So it is impossible to care for the social organism, good of society as a unit, unless each single part and each individual member, that is to say, each individual man in the dignity of his human personality, is applied with all that is necessary for the exercise of his social functions. If social justice be satisfied, the result will be an intense activity in economic life as a whole, bruised in tranquility and order. This activity will be proof of the health of the social body, just as the health of the human body is recognized and the undistributed regularity and perfect efficacy of the whole organism. Look after one another. But social justice cannot be said to have been satisfied as long as working men are denied a salary that will enable them to be secure proper substance for themselves and their families. Yes, the rise in the cost of living is a concern, and the fact that there's a gap between the minimum wage and that cost of living is a concern that needs to be addressed. And honestly, the argument that we can't just always raise the minimum wage doesn't make sense. We need to do things to bring cost of living down, and that is something that governments need to be talking about. I don't want to be gaslighting anyone. Like, I've been hard on a lot of conservatives on this, because I need to be, because there is a myth that any conservative system is legitimate, when it's not. And that's why I've been so hard on right-wingers on this decree condemning communism, because most of the decrees things condemning most of the reasons communism is condemned apply to you as well. But yeah, there is a legitimate concern that it is growing today, and I gotta call it the left as well. As long as they are denied the opportunity of acquiring a modest fortune and forestalling the plague of universal pauperism, as long as they cannot make suitable provision through public or private insurances for old age, yeah, you need to either public or private, you got to have at least one and have it reasonable and affordable and doable. In Canada, where I live, like, there is like a strong social safety net and Canada pension plan. So in Canada, we've opted for public society, and honestly, most Canadians like it that way, myself included. Some countries can say, well, it's up to you, but you need to make it doable for private insurance. But you have to make that affordable and doable. For periods of illness and unemployment. In a word, to repeat what has been said in encyclical Quadrissimo Animo, then only will the economic and social order be soundly established and attain its ends, when it offers to all and to each of all those goods which the wealth, resources of nature, technical and science, and corporate organization, social affairs can give. These goods should be sufficient to supply all necessities and reasonable comforts, and to uplift man to the higher standard of life, which, provided it be used with prudence, is not only to be hindrance, but a singular help of virtue. It happens all too frequently, however, under the salary system, that individual employers are helpless to ensure justice, lest, with a view to its practice, they organize institutions, the object of which is to prevent competition incompatible with fair treatment for workers. This is a common argument I've heard. It happens all too frequently, however, under the salary system, that individual employers are helpless to ensure justice with a view to this practice, and we can't pay you enough so that you can't afford this. Unless they organize institutions of which is prevent competition with fair treatment for incompatible with fair treatment for its workers. So we should need to bring the cost down, but the only way to bring the cost of living down is like the only way we can afford to pay you these just salaries is to bring the cost of living down, and bring the cost of living down is to like have these unfair practices. Where this is true, is the duty of contractors and employers to support both such necessary organizations as normal instruments, enabling them to fulfill their obligations of justice. Employers are to work with unions in many ways to bring this justice about, but laborers too must be mindful of their duty to love, deal fairly with their employers. Like, no, you cannot have violence destruction of property, and protests and strikes and stuff like that, and persuade themselves that there are no means of safeguarding their own interests. You can't be violent. That is forbidden in Catholic teaching. If therefore we consider the whole structure of economic life, as we have already pointed out in our encyclical Quadrissimo Anno, the reign of mutual collaboration between justice and charity in the social economic relations can only be achieved by a body of professional, interprofessional organizations built on solidly Catholic foundations, working together to effect under the forms and adapt different places and circumstances, what has been called cooperation. Work together. To give this social activity a greater efficacy, it is necessary to promote a wider study of social programs in the light of the doctrine of the Church and under the aegis of her constituted authority. Study Catholic teaching. Know your duties and do them. That's 90% of what this document says to do. You know what you're supposed to do, just do it. If the matter of acting of some Catholics in the social economic field has left much to be desired, this has often come about because they have not known and pondered sufficiently the teachings of the Sovereign Pontiffs on the question. Or right, ignore them. I remember leading a Catholic social teaching group, and I remember one of the appointed ministers of the Facebook group said, someone online, you don't need to, it's okay, just read Reverend November. You don't need to believe in it or listen to it. I remember I ejected it into that comment and said, yes, you do. Believe it or get out. This is for Catholics, and if you're not going to embrace Catholic social teaching, you have no business here. We don't want you here. Therefore, it is the utmost importance to foster in all class society, and this is a program of social education, adapted to varying degrees of intellectual culture. It is necessary, with all care and diligence, to procure the widest possible diffusion of the teachings of the Church, even amongst the working classes. The minds of men must be illuminated with the sure light of Catholic teaching. Their wills must be drawn to follow and apply it as the norm of right living in the conscientious fulfillment of their manifold social duties. Thus they will oppose that incoherence and discontinuity of Christian life, which we have many times lamented. For there are some who, while exteriorly faithful to the practice of religion, I know some, I met even trash like this, sadly, and honestly, let's be honest, they're the same with Novus Ordo Catholics who embrace communism. I put you both in the same boat. Sorry. Yet, in the field of labor and industry, in the professions, trade and business, admit a deplorable cleavage in their conscience, and live a life too little in conformity with the clear principles and justice of Christian charity. Such lives are a scandal to the weak, and to the malicious a pretext to discredit the Church. Your behavior as Catholics matters. In this renewal, the Catholic press can play a prominent part. It is foremost duty to foster in various attractive ways an even better understanding of social doctrine. There isn't much of a Catholic press where I live anymore. That being said, there are Tracath YouTubers. So if you're a Tracath YouTuber and you're watching this, start talking about these decrees, what they actually say. Call it legitimate abuses among certain Tracaths who aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I can't do it on my own. You should try to do it. Do some. It's foremost duty to foster its in various attractive ways an even better understanding of social doctrine. It should too supply accurately and complete information on the activity of the enemy, the means of resistance which have been found effective in various quarters. It should offer useful suggestions and warn against the insidious threats which communists endeavor, all too successfully, to attract even men of good faith. Honestly, read history. And every case it has been tried, it has been a total disaster. People should not take communism seriously anymore. Hopefully no one does. But I do want to call out a lot of I do want to call a lot of people as being just as bad as communists. Just as bad. 90%, except for some lack of economic collectivization in the hands of the state, you are essentially communist in your ideology. Most of what is condemned here as being communist applies to you, on people on the right, in society today. On this point, we have already insisted our allocution on May 12th last year, but believe it to be the duty of special urgency, venerable brethren. Call your attention to it once again. In the beginning, communism showed itself what it was in all its perversity, but very soon it realized that it was thus alienating the people. It has therefore changed tactics and strives to entice the multitudes to trickery of various forms, hiding its real design behind ideas that themselves are good and attractive, like helping the poor, etc. Thus, aware of the universal desire for peace, and leaders of communism pretend to be the most zealous promoters of propagandists in the movement for worldly amity, like anti-decolonization, yay, which later on the collapse of empire, yay, peace, and resulting and as we've seen in like Zimbabwe. I remember once in a while ago, Robert Mugabe was held as a social justice hero in the collapse of the racist government of Rhodesia, which was not great, to put it mildly. Yeah, that did not turn out well. That did not well. Yet at the same time, they stir up class warfare, which causes rivers of blood to flow, realizing that their systems offer no internal guarantee of peace. And by the way, if you read the Communist Manifesto, it essentially reads like a rant of saying, society has failed us, therefore we don't care about society, let's burn it all to the ground. That is essentially how the Communist Manifesto reads, in case you haven't read it. They have recourse to unlimited armaments, their various names, which do not suggest communist. They establish organizations, periodicals, with the sole purpose of carrying the ideas to quarters otherwise inaccessible. They try perfidously to worm their way into even professedly Catholic and religious organizations. I know a lot of professors who say they're Marxist and Catholic. Again, without receding an inch from their subversive principles, they invite Catholics to collaborate with them in the realm of so-called humanitarianism and charity, and at times even make proposals that are in perfect harmony with the Christian spirit, doctrine of the Church. I think of development and peace, which I think I stopped giving some while ago because they were caught supporting abortion and leftist ideologies, and it's a shame because like they were doing some good, but I can't be in line with them, and like that is the danger. That is the danger. They may do more harm than good. Now we need these charities to be built up. If they're not going to do it, we trads need to make alternatives. That is something that we should positively can and should do. Like, I'm pretty isolated where I live from other trackcasts, so it's not something I'm really able to do. But if anyone's watching this in a more bigger area where you have resources yourself and then are in touch with other people who have resources, get something like that started. It doesn't have to be huge. Get a traditional Catholic development and peace started. Get a track-cath version of that going. Get a track-cath version of St. Vincent de Paul societies to get started. That is something big that we can do. It honestly is a much better use of our time and resources than complaining online, which is what a lot of track-caths do these days. Elsewhere, they carry their hypocrisy so far as to encourage the belief that communism, in countries where faith and culture are more strongly entrenched, will assume another much milder form. Yeah, that did not happen. It became brutal even there. It will not interfere with the practice of religion. It will respect liberty of conscience. Didn't happen. There are some even who refer to certain changes recently introduced into the Soviet legislation as proof that communism is about to abandon its program of war against God. Didn't happen. See to it, venerable brethren, that the faithful do not allow themselves to be deceived. Communism is intrinsically wrong. Again, 58. Paragraph 58 of the decree against communism to any woke leftist professors. I may have been calling them out some of them, but just about all these criticisms, which you would rightly say are bad in the hand of secular capitalists, apply to communist systems over and over again. Well, communism hasn't really been tried or followed as Marx intended it. Yeah, well, maybe capitalism wasn't tried. Let's try what the church actually teaches. Because that manifestly has not been tried. Manifestly. No one who would save Christian civilization may collaborate with it in any undertaking whatsoever. Those who permit themselves to be deceived into lending their aids towards the triumph of communism in their own country will be the first of all victims to their error. And the greater the antiquity and grandeur of Christian civilization in the regions where communism successfully penetrates, so much more devastating will be the hatred displayed by the godless. True. That has been proven true multiple times. But unless the Lord keep the city, he watches the man that keepeth it. So, as a final most efficacious remedy, we recommend, venerable brethren, that your dioceses use the most practical means to foster and intensify the spirit of prayer joined with Christian penance. Pray. Like, I used to say we need to stop praying and doing more work. I met so many trackouts who do nothing but complain. They say that we need to pray, not work, and they don't even pray. They need to pray and work. A lot of us are doing neither. When the apostles asked the Savior why they had been unable to drive the evil spirit from the demoniac, our Lord answered, "This kind is not cast out by prayer and fasting. So too, the evil which today torments humanity can be conquered only by a worldwide crusade of prayer and penance. We ask especially the contemplative orders, men and women, who double their prayers and sacrifices." And come on, like all of us, we track us. If you're watching this, just do it. Well, you need to talk to a priest. Okay, talk to your priest. Well, he's away. Well, when's he coming back? Next month. Well, okay, ask him then. Well, he's busy. Probably won't have time to see me. Okay, you're making excuses. I've heard it before. Telling people they don't want to do anything. You're making legalistic excuses to get out of doing anything. You have the Pope's specific request. We're not talking about wearing cleeces. We're saying maybe offering your rosary each day. Pray an hour each day, which by the way you should be doing anyway. Maybe remember to when you abstain from meat on Fridays, offer your abstinence from meat for those in need, for the people delivered from errors, to obtain from heaven the efficacious aid for the church in the present struggle. Let them implore also the powerful intercession of the Immaculate Virgin, who, having crushed the head of the serpent of old, remains the sure protectress and invincible help of Christians. To apply the remedies thus briefly indicated to the task of saving the world, as we have traced above, Jesus Christ, the Divine King, has chosen priests as the first-line ministers and messengers of his gospel. Theirs is the duty assigned to them by special vocation, under the direction of other bishops and in filial obedience, the vicar of Christ on earth. Keep alight in the world the torch of faith, the firing of the hearts and filling the hearts of the faithful with supernatural trust, which has aided the church to fight and win so many other battles in the name of Christ. That is the victory which overcometh the world, our faith. To priests, in a special way, we recommend anew the oft-repeated counsel of our predecessors, Leo XIII. Go to the working man, to make his advice our own. Priests, if you're watching this, listen to the poor and needy, and especially in SSPX parishes. They resist, and faithful to teachings, and do something to help them, even a small micro level. And the faithful to the teachings of Jesus Christ Church. Thus we complete it. Go to the working man, especially where he is poor, and in general, go to the poor. The poor are obviously, it wasn't Pope Francis. Pope Francis has said many incredibly questionable things and heretical things, blatantly. But in saying that we should care about the poor and feed the needy is not one of them. The poor are obviously more exposed than others to the walls of agitators who, taking advantage of their extreme need, kindle their hearts to envy the rich and urge them to seize by force what fortune seems to have been denied them unjustly. The priest will not go to the working men, to the poor, to warn them and to dissuade them of prejudice and false theory. They will become an easy prey for the apostles of communism. Indisputably, much has been done in this direction, either after the publication of the encyclicals Rerum Novarum and Quadragesimo Animo. You know, those decrees that actually fight communism, that the industrialists try to prevent from being read in churches. We are happy to voice our paternal approval of the zealous pastoral activity manifested by so many bishops and priests, who have, with due prudence and caution, been planning and applying new methods of apostolate more adapted to modern needs. But for the solution of our present problem, all this effort is still inadequate. When our country is in danger, everything not strictly necessary, everything not bearing directly on the urgent matter of unified defense, takes second place. So we must act in today's crisis. Every other enterprise, however attractive and helpful, must yield before the vital need of protecting the very foundation of the faith and of Christian civilization. Let our parish priests, therefore, while providing, of course, for the normal needs of the faithful, dedicate the better part of their endeavors and their zeal to winning back to the laboring masses to Christ and to His Church. Let them work to infuse the Christian spirit into quarters where it is least at home. The willing response to the masses and results from exceeding their expectations will not fail toward them for the strenuous pioneer labor. That has been and continues to be our experience in Rome and other capitals, where zealous parish communities are being formed as new churches are built in suburban districts. Real miracles are being worked in the conversion of people who have hostility to religion has been due solely to the fact that they did not know it. Most efficacious means of the apostolate among the poor and lowly is the priest's example. Like, I cannot emphasize enough. If you're a priest and watching this, your behavior is going to affect how people perceive the Catholic faith. It shouldn't be that way, but that's going to bring you're going to draw a lot of people or drive a lot of people away from the Catholic faith if you're a priest. My personal advice is, if you're not the next St. John Maria Vianney, do not enter the priesthood. Because the priest can do a lot of good, but they can also do a lot of harm. The practice of all those sacerdotal virtues, which we have described in our encyclical, especially needful, however, for the present situation, is a shining example of life which is humble, poor, disinterested, imitation of a divine master, who could say to a world with divine simplicity, "The foxes have holes and birds their nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head." priest who is really poor and disinterested in the gospel sense may work among his flock, marvels recalling a St. Vincent de Paul, cur of Ars, a Contagio, a Don Bosco, and so many others. While an avaricious and selfish priest, as we have noted in the above-mentioned encyclical, even though he should not plunge with Judas in the abyss of treason, will never be more than empty sounding brass and useless tinkling cymbals. Too often indeed, he will be a hindrance rather than an instrument of grace in the midst of his people. Furthermore, where a secular priest or religious is obliged by his office to administer temporal property, let him remember that he is not only to observe scrupulosity all that charity and justice prescribe, that he has a special obligation to conduct himself in very truth as the father of the poor. After this appeal to the clergy, we extend our paternal invitation to our beloved sons among the laity who are doing battle in the ranks of Catholic action. Another occasion, we have called this movement, so dear to our heart, a particularly providential assistance in the work of the Church during these troublous times. Catholic action is in effect a social apostolate who, inasmuch as its object is to spread the kingdom of Jesus Christ, not only among individuals, but also in family and society, it must therefore make a chief aim to train its members with special care and to prepare them to fight the battles of the Lord. This task of formation, now more urgent and indispensable than ever, which must always precede direct action in the field, will surely be served by study circles, conferences, lecture courses, and various other activities undertaken with the view of making known the Christian solution of the social problem. Again, study the faith. 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 Don't be ignoramuses and go after secular ideologies. The militant leaders of Catholic action, thus properly prepared and armed, will be the first and immediate apostles of the fellow workmen. They will be an invaluable aid to the priest in carrying forth the word of truth, in relieving grave spiritual and material suffering. In many sectors where inveterate and anti-clerical prejudice or deplorable religious indifference has proved a constant obstacle to the pastoral activity of God's ministers, in this way they will collaborate under the direction of especially qualified priests in that work of spiritual aid to the laboring classes on which we set so much store, because it is the means best calculated to save these, our beloved children, from the snares of communism. Basically, help the poor, don't be a DICK, and know the Catholic faith. That's mostly it. It's super simple. Why isn't it being done? It is into the individual postulate, which, however useful and efficacious, often goes unheralded. Catholic action must organize propaganda on a large scale to disseminate knowledge of the fundamental principles on which, according to the pontifical documents, a Christian social order must build. Like, imagine if you had like a YouTube channel. Wouldn't that be great? Like, imagine if you have like Catholic YouTubers actually talking about the Catholic faith and legitimate Catholic social justice, and like promoting online through Instagram, etc. Imagine something like that could be done today if those technologies existed. Wouldn't that be amazing? Arranged with Catholic action are the groups which we have been happy to call its auxiliary forces. With paternal affection, we exhort these valuable organizations to dedicate themselves to the great mission of which we have been treating, a cause which today transcends all others in vital importance. We are thinking likewise of those associations of workmen, farmers, technicians, doctors, employers, students, and others of like character, groups of men and women who live in the same cultural atmosphere and share the same way of life. Precisely these groups and organizations are destined to introduce in society the order which you have investigated. Now, this will be quite hard. I remember going to a Catholic university group one time, and it was like full of leftist nonsense to the extreme. A lot of them would do nothing. Even where the state, because of changed social and economic conditions, has felt obliged to intervene directly in order to aid and regulate such organizations by special legislative enactments, supposing always the necessary respect for liberty and private initiative, Catholic action may not urge the circumstance as an excuse for abandoning the field. Like, oh, it's hard where I live. Like, you are allowed to like make a YouTube channel. Yes, then make a YouTube channel. Its members should contribute prudently, intelligently, the study of the problems of the hour in the light of the Catholic doctrine. Again, study the faith. They should loyally and generously participate in the formation of new institutions, bringing them to the Christian spirit, which is the basic principle of order, wherever men work together in fraternal harmony. Here we would like to address particularly the affectionate words of our Catholic working men, young and old. They have been given, perhaps as a reward for their heroic fidelity in these trying days, noble and arduous mission. Under the guidance of their bishops and priests, they are to bring back to the Church and to God those immense multitudes of their brother workmen, who, because they were not understood or treated with respect with which they were entitled, and bitterness have strayed far from God. The Catholic working men show these their modern brethren by word and example that the Church is a tender mother to those who labor and suffer. She has never failed, never will fail, in her sacred and maternal duty of protecting her children. And if this mission, which must be fulfilled in mines and factories and shops, whatever may be laboring, should times require great sacrifices, our working men will remember that the Savior of the world has given them an example not only of toil but of self-immolation. Now, you don't have to work in mines, but whatever you do, wherever you are, it is an opportunity to evangelize. And this doesn't just apply to like bring people away from communism. And this also applies to the university. I remember inviting some to mass because we met university, and he went and is now practicing the traditional Catholic faith as of this moment. It is an occasion to invite Protestants, even if you're online and just a gamer who is a NEET and laying in your house playing video games all day. You can play online video games with people. You can make and use streaming video games as an occasion to talk about the Catholic faith and share it with others. Even something as simple as that. Do something. Whatever your situation in life may be, use it as a tool to evangelize. Sometimes it'll be more direct, sometimes it needs to be more indirect, sometimes it's just a social networking thing to reach out to people. Do something, whatever it may be. To all our children, finally, of every social rank, of every nation, of every religious and lay organization in the church, we make another and more urgent appeal for union. Many times our paternal heart has been saddened by the divergencies, often idle in their causes, always tragic in their consequences, which array in opposing camps the sons of the same mother church. Thus it is that the radicals, who are not very numerous, profiting by the discord, are able to make it more acute, and by pitting Catholics one against the other. In view of the events of the past few months, warning must seem superfluous. Repeat it nevertheless once more. Those who have not understood, or perhaps are not able to understand, those who make a practice of spreading dissension among Catholics assume a terrible responsibility before God and the Church. Love your Catholic brethren. When in this battle, joined by the powers of darkness against the very idea of the divinity of divinity, is our fond hope that besides the host which glories the name of Christ, all those, and they comprise the overwhelming majority of mankind, who still believe in God and pay him homage, may take a decisive part. Look, I'm anti-ecumenical, but I have worked with non-Catholics on various other fronts. On study, for example, a lot of the biblical archaeologists like listening to are Protestants. There are areas where we can work with non-Catholics. We therefore renew the invitation to extend to them 5 years ago in our encyclical Caritae Christi, invoking their loyal and hearty collaboration in order to ward off from mankind the great danger that threatens all alike. Protestantism is heresy. Islam and Hinduism are false religions, but atheism is just a new level of evil. Since as when we have said, belief in God is the unshakable foundation of all social order and all responsibility on earth, it follows that all those who do not want anarchy and terrorism ought to take energetic steps to prevent the enemies of religion from attaining the goal they have so brazenly proclaimed to the world. Secular societies are the worst ones. Such is the positive task, bracing at once theory and practice, which the Church undertakes in virtue of the mission confided to her by Christ, of constructing a Christian society in our own times, of resisting into victory the attacks of communism. It is the duty of the Christian state to concur actively in the spiritual enterprise of the Church, aiding her with the means at its command, which, although they be external devices, have nonetheless for their prime objects the good of souls. This means that all diligence should be exercised by states to prevent within their territories the ravages of an anti-God campaign which shakes society to its very foundations. But someone forgot to tell the Americans, with the separation of church and state, there can be no authority on earth unless the authority of the divine majesty has been recognized. That is true. When we have secular governments, authority comes from the people, yeah, and it's a system that authorizes revolution and violence. And as we have seen in recent years, well, people are wrong, or the election was stolen, etc., claimed by both sides in the United States, I might add. Therefore, I can overthrow government. And they're on the other side is the enemy, therefore I don't need to respect them. That is very much society of today. No oath will bind, which is not sworn in the name of the living God. Repeat what we have said with frequent insistence in the past, especially our encyclical. How can any contract be maintained? What value can any treaty have in which every guarantee of conscience is lacking? How can there be talk of guarantee of conscience when all faith in God and all fear of God has vanished? Well, I want to win. I just want to glorify, insert Britain, insert America, insert any country on earth, insert my ideology or goal. And I not anything that achieves that goal is what's good. That's where we are in society, and we can see it. Take away this basis, and with it, all moral law falls. There's no remedy left to stop the gradual but inevitable destruction of peoples, families, the state, and civilization itself. It must likewise be the special care of the state to create those material conditions of life without which an orderly society cannot exist. It's not the job of the government to care about the economy. Actually, yes, it is. The state must take every measure necessary to supply employment. Actually, yes, it is the government's job to get you a job, at least in a certain sense, or at least to enable that you can get a job. Employment is a government concern, particularly for the heads of families and for the young. Young employers and heads of families in particular. To achieve this end demanded by the present needs of the common welfare, the wealthy classes must be induced to assume those burdens without which human society cannot be saved, nor they themselves remain secure. However, measures taken by the state with this end in view ought to be of such a nature that they will really affect those who actually possess more than their share of capital resources, and who contribute to accumulate to them the grievous detriment of others. So when you actually have people who are taking more than their fair share, and are redistributing the wealth to the people who don't have as much, you actually need to be taking people who really are taking more than their fair share. You need to actually distribute to people who do not have as much. It cannot be a massive government cash grab, which unfortunately is often the case. The state itself, mindful of its responsibility before God and society, should be a model of prudence and sobriety in the administration of the Commonwealth. Today, more than ever, the acute world crisis demands that those who dispose of immense funds built on the sweat and toil of millions keep constantly and singly in mind the common good. State functionaries and all employees are obliged in conscience to perform their duties faithfully and selflessly, maintaining the brilliant example of distinguished men of the past and of their own day, who with unremitting labor sacrificed their all for the good of their country. In international trade relations, let all means be zealously employed for the removal of those artificial barriers to economic life which are the effects of distrust and hatred. In international trade relations, let all means be zealously employed for the removal of those artificial barriers to economic life, which are the effects of distrust and hatred. Must remember that the people of the earth form one family of God. I was not expecting that. It's kind of like it's a warning against extreme protectionism. It seems to be. At least to the extent where I want to protect my country's economy, but I don't care about my neighbors. Certainly, that's the attitude. Like when a national economy is founded, you should think about how it's going to affect the economy of other nations. Maybe not free trade is not. Maybe saying about this North's free trade is not the right thing to say, but you should seriously think about the reality of how privatization, economic, setting your country's companies into another country, having free trade, going protectionist, etc., is going to affect people, nations other than you and yours, and not have a crazy worship towards your economy. You should be genuinely concerned about how your system is going to affect people over there, because it may not work the same way. And you should genuinely care about your neighbor. Like the United States should care about how their economic policies affect Mexico and Canada. Canada should think about how its economic policies affect Europe, the United States, etc. And they should genuinely try to find solutions that work for everyone. At the same time, the state must allow the church to full liberty to fulfill her divine spiritual mission. This is in itself will be an effectual contribution to the rescue of nations from the dread torment of the present hour. Everywhere today, there is an anxious appeal to moral and spiritual forces, and rightly so, for the evil we must combat is at its origin primarily an evil of the spiritual order. From this polluted source, the monstrous emanations of the communistic system flow with satanic logic. Now, the Catholic Church is undoubtedly preeminent among the moral and religious forces of today. Therefore, the good of humanity demands that her work be allowed to proceed unhindered. Those who act otherwise, and at the same time fondly pretend to attain their objective with purely political or economic means, on the grip of dangerous error. Again, secular society today, left and right. Left and right. When religion is banished from the school, from education, and from public life, when the representatives of Christianity and its sacred rights are held up to ridicule, we are not really fostering the materialism. Are we not really fostering the materialism which is the fertile soul of communism? Neither force, however well organized it be, nor earthly ideals, however lofty or noble, can control a movement whose roots lie in the excessive esteem for goods of this world. We trust that those rulers of nations who are aware of the extreme danger threatening every people today may be more and more convinced of the supreme duty not to hinder the Church in the fulfillment of her mission. This is the more imperative since, while this mission has in view man's happiness in heaven, it cannot but promote his true felicity in time. We cannot conclude this encyclical letter without addressing some words to our children who are more or less tainted by with communist plague. We earnestly exhort them to hear the voice of their loving Father. We pray the Lord to enlighten them, that they may abandon the slippery path which will participate one and all to ruin and catastrophe. They may recognize that Jesus Christ, our Lord, is their only Savior. There's no other name under heaven given to man by which we may be saved, be it in this world or the next. To hasten the advent of the peace in Christ and the kingdom of Christ, so ardently desired by all, we place the vast campaign of the Church against world communism on the standard of St. Joseph, his Almighty protector. He belongs to the working class. He bore the burdens of poverty himself, and the Holy Family, whose tender and valiant head he was. To him was entrusted the divine child when Herod loosed his assassins against him. In life of faithful performance of everyday duties, he left an example for all who must gain their bread by the toil of the hands. He won for himself the title of the Just, serving thus as a living model of that Christian justice which should reign in social life. With eyes lifted on high, our faith sees the new heavens and the new earth described by our predecessor, St. Peter. While the promises of false prophets of the earth melt away in blood and tears, the great apocalyptic prophecy of the dreamer shines forth in heavenly splendor. Behold, I make all things new. So, venerable brethren, nothing remains but to raise our paternal hands to call down upon you, upon your clergy and people, upon the whole world, Catholic family, the apostolic benediction. Given at Rome, St. Peter's feast of the patron St. Joseph, Universal Church, 19th of March, 1937. So this decree actually blasts communism, but a lot of the errors of communism, which are condemned, also apply to general secular society today. It's not a lot of track has to go after secular ideologies of all sorts. It applies to them as well. And only a few minor points of communism are not being followed. Be it Americanizers who believe in separation of church and state and love it. Be it Catholics who go after like secular conservatism or secular capitalism, or sadly even Nazism or fascism. In most cases, these apply. These are all secular ideologies, and those are the big foundational problems with communism from which all these other errors flow. That is why we as Catholics faithful to the tradition need to reject them all. Anyway, God bless. Have a great day. If you got a chance, check out NSSPX Church. Say a Hail Mary for all of you. Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at our death. Amen.